All right, so I'm just going to get started. So, this is my podcast. It's called Born in the USA, Unloving American Attitudes. And I'm your host, Helena Martin. And today I have two very, very special guests, Jesus and Mary, so the Messiah. So if you've listened to any of my previous episodes, you know that the whole spiritual basis for my podcast is divine truth. And Jesus and Mary are the main teachers of divine truth. And they've helped me the most of anybody I've ever met to realize the issues I have. And they've related to them, my issues, to how they relate to being born and raised in the U.S. So, and the whole podcast is the point of it is to try to help people in the U.S. see the common emotional injuries we have, right? Because the U.S. has a lot of influence over the world, unfortunately negatively. And I always feel like if we could turn that ship around, it would kind of loosen the boot that we have on the throat of so many other countries. And we could also have a very positive ripple effect as well. So, just to give you two a primer, I've talked about facade, I've talked about entitlement, I've talked about like how that relates to wasting resources and not wanting to feel things and stuff.
So you've talked about these things in reference to what you feel was the regard to the USA.
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah. So if people have listened to the podcast, they'll have a bit of a primer on that. And I do assume most people listening to the podcast have listened to Divine Truth, but I don't want to, I guess... I always want to keep it open.
Yeah, and we'll stay away from explanations or language that people might not understand if they haven't listened to Divine Truth.
Yeah, sure. And what I guess I mean is that the first thing I want you guys to talk about is a little bit about who you are. Like, what's the Messiah? Like, what is that whole situation about? And then I thought we could talk about your experience in the U.S. Jesus, I know you've spent quite a lot of time there. And then with Americans generally. And then that'll be a good segue into what are some of the common injuries that Americans have, you know, the bad attitudes that we have, or things that could be positive, they were directed in a different way. So that's that's the structure. Yeah. So can we just start off where you guys could introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about yourselves? And I know that's a lot, but what it means to be the Messiah and why you're here and what you're teaching.
Well, you know, obviously we've returned back to Earth after being away for a couple of thousand years. And the main reason why we returned was so we could teach people about God's love and God's truth and God's laws. And also the process of receiving God's love to the point where you can become at one with God. So that's our primary focus, is to teach. And then you could say a part of that is living the life we live in terms of as an example of how to live a life as well, along with many other things that you could say are less important things to us, but also a part of what we're trying to do. So that includes helping people in the spirit world and helping people on earth as well to progress, so that people, when they do pass, have less trouble and trauma when they pass. So the goal is fundamentally to love people and to bring some knowledge and truth to people so that they themselves can benefit from the love they receive from God firstly, and then can also share the love they themselves feel with others.
Yeah, I think what's really important to me is that everyone understands that they have this gift of free will and that they can choose to use that free will to have a relationship with God or not, and that there's many benefits to that relationship with God, like eternal benefits. But equally, God is a God of love and God has loving laws. So even if we don't choose that personal relationship with God, there's a lot of laws governing our happiness and how to be happy. So I think educating people about that is really a core desire for us, isn't it?
Yeah, so for us, teaching is really education, providing education. It's not education that's been provided on earth very much at all. And so for that reason, we felt we had to return so that it became a lot more clearer what kind of education we tried to provide in the first century, and also, what kind of education relates to the truth, what God's truth actually is.
So, to recap, first century, you guys were incarnated, you were teaching together, you died. Then you're chilling in the spirit world, teaching probably too. We probably weren't chilling.
Not so much chilling, but yeah.
You're busy.
And over time you thought, things on earth are... what we taught back in the day, it's being misinterpreted and distorted, so we need to go back.
Yeah, so we had a desire to go back for a long time, but we didn't work out until 1935. We didn't really work out how to return. So there was a lot of reasons for that, is because it required a certain level of development on our part in order to return, to understand the laws involved in how we could actually take over a body on earth that's been conceived, and do it by our choice rather than it being an automatic thing that God's laws normally look after. And nobody up until that stage had returned, so nobody knew how to do it. So we had to learn how to do it, and that was a part of our process. And once we learned how to do it, we hung around a little bit further in the spirit world so that we could teach others, six other couples how to do it as well. And then, of course, we returned first, and then they returned over a period of nearly 20 years. And so it gives us this opportunity then to be back on earth and actually teach the things that we'd learnt during the entire 2,000 years of our life up until that point. It was better doing that than it was trying to share the truth through people on earth, because we found that every time we tried to share the truth through people, as a spirit, it became quite frustrating because a lot of people started to distort the truth straight away. And so then it became difficult to even want to share the truth with somebody on earth who was wanting to teach it to somebody else, because you ended up sharing a truth with that person, but they distorted it. And then the distortion meant that there were further distortions on earth about what was true and what wasn't. And that was something we wanted to avoid.
And Jesus, when you're talking about sharing the truth as a spirit, you mean talking to a medium, or what people would call a psychic.
Yeah.
People who are open to spirits, or people who have died, ghosts.
Yeah, it's very easy for a spirit to talk to people and also to share feelings with people. What's difficult is their interpretation of those words and feelings, and that often gets quite distorted.
Well, one of the famous people you talked to is James Padgett, an American.
Yeah.
Yes, and you channeled a lot of messages to him, didn't you?
Yeah. He was interested in talking to spirits after his wife died, and that was the early 20th century, and he wanted to talk to spirits, mostly to talk to his wife, but we sort of saw it as an opportunity. His wife knew us, and so through different relationships we had with her, you could say grandparents and great-grandparents, and as a result of that, we got to talk to James Padgett as well. Of course, he didn't believe we were talking to him initially, and so that took a fair bit of time to convince him. And then once he felt more convinced and had a bit more faith in the fact that we were talking to him, we could share some truths, and we got to share some a lot of truths that are very close to the truth with him, which was a very rare thing that we had not been able to do up until that point very much.
And that was particularly in relation to God, God's nature, God's laws, and also yourself, Jesus, and Jesus' role, and that Jesus is not a part of God, and those kind of very widely held Christian beliefs were able to be corrected.
Yeah. But there are some things that couldn't be. He had issues in terms of believing certain beliefs about me, which meant that he didn't know I had a soulmate, or didn't really think about it very much. And so,
could we say he didn't want to know?
He didn't really want to know. And so it was difficult for Mary to share anything, and therefore difficult to give a balanced truth about many issues as well, because of the sort of denial of the feminine side of God. So that, we could see there were different problems associated with sharing truth with him, but in the end we got to share a lot of very good truths with him, which weren't up until that time known on earth. So that was good, and also we didn't know at the time, but we now realise that we were giving ourselves a bit of a message as well for when we did come back.
It's such a science fiction movie to me. Your whole reincarnation, like, oh, this is the map that we made 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very. It blows my mind. But.
Yeah, so that's been beneficial for us in particular because we have a resonance with those truths and therefore could find them quite easily and expand upon them quite easily as well.
Yeah, and it's probably a whole podcast discussion, isn't it? The process of us returning and what that's like and how the process of remembering even.
Yeah, and all that stuff is a separate issue, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go right into the American stuff. And James Padgett's a good segue because America's a very Christian country, right? It's got the most Christians of any other country, just in terms of population. And I think...
When you say population, is that percentage of population or by population?
Yeah. Can I sort of clarify a few things? Though?
Sure, please.
It depends what you view Christianity to be. Firstly, what I taught in the first century was what I would classify Christianity.
Okay.
And what most people on earth believe is Christianity it bears very little resemblance to the things I taught in the first century. So there are some similarities and many differences. And so what I wouldn't necessarily call it Christianity. I would call it a created religious faith based upon many things that happened over the course of history from our time on earth in the first century till now that caused a modification of certain teachings into what's called Christianity. But I wouldn't sort of label it Christianity. It's more professed Christianity, I would call it. Secondly, this problem is not an American problem. It's religion got established before the American continent became really populated by white people, and most religious faiths based on Christianity began obviously in Europe, and so many of the problems and many of the belief systems that have been established were established by Europeans, not by Americans. Americans, being the progeny of those people, obviously took on many of those belief systems. And so when you talk about culture, I don't sort of see culture as a country thing. I sort of see it more as a combination of the history of a group of people in terms of the long-term history, their forefathers, coming down to the present, combined with the very many different belief systems they have, some of which are religious and some of which are relating to things like economics, politics, medicine, and all sorts of practices that go on. And that sort of amalgamates into a culture, which of course then is taught to the progeny of the people in that culture. And so I don't sort of see problems as an American problem or an English problem or a Brazilian problem. I just sort of see them as the issue is either in harmony with love and truth, God's truth and God's love, or out of harmony with God's love and God's truth. Yeah. So it's important to understand for any listener, it's important for them to understand that when we talk about the American, because you're coming from the born in the USA thing. When we talk about it with you, we don't see as many of these problems as unique to America. Often many of the problems are related to the first world versus the third world,
or
and so
West.
forth. The West versus.
I was going to say, I feel like a lot of things we're going to talk about today have to do that all Westerners have.
Including
Australians.
And every culture has a degree of things in it too. So if you go to Eastern cultures, again, they've been brought up a certain way with certain belief systems.
I sort of see culture as it's sort of an amalgamation of shared values and beliefs, and some of those are really out of harmony with love, but those things out of harmony with love are also in some other quote-unquote cultures as well, aren't they?
That's right.
But in various regions you have people who have sort of a shared history or shared experiences, and some of those experiences they've seen as successes and some of them have seen as bad things, and if they haven't dealt with their feelings about those things or sought love and truth about those things, they often become problematic within that region. But I agree with Jesus. It's not like all Americans should be lumped in this pile and all Australians, because
well, as you know, America in itself is made up of many.
yeah,
There's many
States.
Mexicans. There's many, and other countries all
Melting pot.
melting pot.
And even different parts of the country are very different
Yes.
vibe.
Yeah, and
than
a
other
lot of that
parts.
is historically because America was very open to receiving, visitors from other countries.
Yeah.
Maybe less so now, it
You
appears,
might.
but it's historically been very open to receiving visitors from all sorts of different countries, and this is why many people have gone there in the first place.
Yep.
But when it comes to the majority, I suppose you could say, obviously it's one of the highly so-called professed Christian nations. And obviously there's a lot of professed Christianity being practiced in America, which if you compared it to, say, China, there's no...
Right. Well, in the textbooks they say there is no God.
Exactly. So, there's people in China who do believe in God, but the culture itself doesn't encourage such beliefs. And so, this is where you get a history of things occurring that turn into what we see in the modern day or the modern age. And I also feel that if we're going to raise the issue of these things, it's very important to see that historically, if you trace it back far enough, many cultures began with families. So they actually had a single family move to a country for all sorts of reasons, a group of reasons.
families, yeah.
They developed their own languages as a result of the moving, which were often caused by the fact that the people wanted to develop a different language, and sometimes it was caused by the fact that distance causes a historical change in terms of what language you may speak as well. And you get modifications to it, just like at the moment the English language is getting modified a lot. And so you end up with this change that occurs where many countries have a certain family traits that are now in the entire country rather than just part of the original family.
That's blowing my mind. So, like, some of the vibes of the country are... Initially, the seed started with just one family who wanted to break away from their previous country.
That's right. If you think about the first so-called white people settlers of America, for example,
pilgrims, we call them.
Pilgrims.
Okay, yeah.
There was only a very few of them initially, and they all came with very similar ideas and the same language. Obviously, mostly the English language was spoken, and so. And then their injuries or their emotions, their feelings and their practices and their beliefs got then imposed upon their progeny, which then, if you multiply that by enough time, 300 years or whatever it is now, what is it now for America since the
Pilgrims came?
since the Pilgrims came.
Gosh, I don't know.
Was
Columbus
it the 1600s or the 1500s
That's
or 1400s or something?
1400s. That was Columbus was 1492. So I think the Pilgrims were probably
so after that. So you're talking like now. What is it? Period of like 500, 600 years. Over that time, a lot of changes obviously happened.
Yeah.
But we can look at the Pilgrims, can't we, and
That's
say,
right.
well, what were their common ideas and beliefs, and compare that to modern
many of
America.
Many of those common ideas and beliefs are still in modern America.
Really? So they're pretty puritanical, is what I.
They were.
Yes.
That's right.
Do you feel like that still is part of the vibe of the U.S. today?
Certainly, there's a whole. It's a fake puritanical though, in a way,
It's
isn't
a
it?
facade.
It's a facade of being pure.
Okay.
But it's definitely there, and Americans are very afraid, aren't they, of sexual impurity,
It's
for
true.
example, which was something that the first settlers of America had a lot of feelings about. And so this is where you get these quite strong feelings that cause an attraction to a religious faith, but it actually comes from a family based or the beliefs of the prior generations, that haven't changed very much over time. So now what's happening in America is that when it comes to like sex, Americans are very are known to be worldwide to be quite like puritanical about sex, even though it's quite obvious that many Americans practice sexual practices that are completely out of harmony with what the Bible prescribes, but nobody wants to really talk about it very much, or or the people who do are often criticised.
And isn't there that thing with like media? Because obviously in the rest of the world we receive a lot of American film and television, and the ratings on film and television for violence as opposed to sexual content are very
amazingly there's a lot of times the sexual content, like just nudity or something, is quite innocent, but it's got an R rating. But then you look at the extreme violence and it's got an M rating or MA rating, and
or even a PG rating, or whatever the equivalent is.
Sometimes, and you go, wow, it's just a demonstration a lot of times of the same restrictions based on culture, based on history.
Absolutely, you can watch a movie, someone getting gunned down, just shooting people, and that's okay. But if someone's
in slow motion,
yeah. But if you see any nudity or explicit sex, then that's considered a really adult movie, or kind of a racy movie, or an inappropriate movie.
That's right. Yeah, and often the religious, is it the right?
The right,
The religious right gets more upset about that, the nudity in a film, than they do about the violence in a film, for example. And you can see sort of why, because, of the history of the people who arrived in the country right from the beginning.
That's so interesting.
Because I think even I've heard somebody say that they were studying abroad in Europe and they saw a commercial and it was for lotion and the woman was nude in that. That would never happen in America.
No, that's
so either
right.
other Western countries are less stiff about sex than America.
Well,
No pun intended.
I don't know if I'd say that either, because every country has its own injuries regarding. Some are very permissive, and they have their own injuries regarding that, and others are they actually enjoy showing things off sexually to get responses from people. Some countries like that, exhibitionists almost, and so every country has its own injuries that cause them to behave a certain way, and it's important to. A lot of people view that as culture, but I don't view it as culture. I view it as emotional injuries or disagreements with God about what is loving or truthful.
Yeah, and that's what we sort of talked about that before we started recording, because I was reflecting about culture. I've lived abroad a lot myself in this life, and the idea of culture used to fascinate me, and now I see it as it's just a name given to a bunch of people who've decided to share a certain set of values and beliefs, and they really are not, they don't make those people belong to each other anymore. That, often within a culture there's a feeling like, oh, I'm an Australian, you're an American, and we belong to those people, and that is our country. And you can feel that in people, this feeling of like, I want to belong, and part of the way that I belong is through these shared values and beliefs. But actually,
once you work through the shared values and beliefs, you realise you belong to God, and you're His child, and everybody else is too.
And you belong to humanity that God created, race. And so you belong to everybody or nobody.
Or nobody.
Depending on how you view it.
And that's that family feeling again, isn't it? That's how we...
Yeah. There's a great deal of nostalgia about having a family, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And many of them are to do with security, safety, economic security, religious security. There's all sorts of reasons why a person feels sort of attracted to one set of belief systems or one culture rather than another.
Because we do see that when we travel, don't we, that people actually leave their country and go and live in a culture, quote unquote culture, that suits their aspirations more.
Correct.
So, when we meet an Italian person living in somewhere that's renowned for being more stoic, it usually indicates that they've grown up in a culture where everybody was potentially more flamboyant and expressive, but they didn't feel good
like
there.
It very much.
So they moved somewhere where they felt like they could sort of fit.
Right. Okay. More. So they didn't like how expressive everybody was growing up, and so they moved
and
to
sometimes
Sweden.
it can be. Some it's beautiful when somebody's expressive but it's real.
Yeah.
But then, if someone's expressive but it's really a bit fake and not really very real, then of course you might be turned off by that as a child. You might feel, that feels bad to me as a child because it's untruthful. But then because of that injury, not releasing it, you then feel attracted to go to someone that's the opposite of that. They have a different injury, of course. They just are suppressing their feelings, but you like that better. And this is where a lot of people are attracted to culture, and it even gets down to even the food they eat and everything. A lot of the foods are particularly chosen because it's an expression of the injury, actually, of the culture. And it's really strange that if you think about food generally, there's so much variety. We could eat all sorts of things from what we classify nowadays as Chinese or Thai, Thai or whatever, right the way through to Mexican and, cuisine, French or whatever. There's a whole, if you look at cuisine in itself, there's a whole heap of emotional reasons why certain types of cuisine is chosen over a different type. And it's really interesting when you get connected emotionally and you connect to God, you realise, there's so much restriction in a culture, really, that which is based on the emotions that particular culture feel and express, rather than there being the wide variety which God intended, which was that all of us really have food from every culture, because all food is in the end not culture based, it's just food.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So even down to just even a thing like food in a culture is determined a lot by the prior beliefs, emotional experiences, feelings and thoughts of the individuals and why they chose what they chose.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about all the Francophiles and Anglophiles I know in the U.S. Yeah. But, okay, can we get some more context here? Can you guys talk about your experience in the U.S.? You've traveled, you're now traveling every year internationally, but have you been to the U.S. in the past? What did that look like?
I started going to the U.S. in, I think it was 2004 or 5. I can't quite remember the exact year.
20 years ago.
So 20-something years ago. I think I was just trying to look at it the other day, but I've probably stayed in the US for about a sum total of 18 months in terms of total time.
Okay. And you've stayed, haven't you? You've often stayed with families.
People, with families, in different, different states. I've stayed in Florida with families. I've stayed in Texas with families, North Carolina with families, New York with families, on the West Coast too, California.
Oh, really?
And Arizona, so Nevada. So there's been, quite a number of times when we've stayed with families in for various times, from a week to 3 months or whatever we could stay in the country for on a visitor's visa. And of course, we've been in and out of America a lot as well, because obviously every time we go from to Europe, we generally visit Canada and America and sometimes Brazil. And so we've had to go through America many, many times as well. So I think I've been through in and out of America like 30 or 40 times. But in terms of staying there for periods of time, maybe close to 20. But for different lengths of time, from a few weeks to 3 months or so. Yeah.
And if you're staying with families, you get more immersed in what
you do, what life is like for the average family, So I've gone to a college football game with the family, and we've gone to, sometimes the hospital with the family if they had somebody sick or whatever, and you get to see a lot of things that you possibly wouldn't see as a normal visitor, because you're living there with them and spending time with them, going shopping with them, doing work outside with them, going to do work for other people with them, and visiting, in my case, visiting religions. So I've visited many religious faiths in America, of different faiths, not just Christian. So you get to see how different people in America live their life, not just a Christian family, but all sorts of different families, with different backgrounds. I've lived also with people who are immigrants to America, so I get to feel what they feel in the culture as well. With like if they're a black immigrant or a Asian immigrant into America, the different projections that are sort of there in the culture. So you get to have quite a well-rounded view of what's going on in a culture by having this time, that you spend. And this is what Mary and I enjoy about staying. And Mary's done the same thing in other countries too.
But
We do it in other countries too.
Yeah, I would say I haven't spent hardly the amount of time Jesus has spent in the United States.
Yeah, we were thinking maybe some total, maybe 4 months for you or something like that.
Yeah, maybe 4 months.
Yeah.
But I did start travelling and living abroad, so in South America and then in Europe. But I started that in
when you were 16.
1996 or something.
Yeah, way before I even went overseas.
And so my experience of Americans has been knowing a lot of them living outside of America as expats. Yeah. And obviously, since I met Jay, we've been going to the States we had a break in the middle there, but we've been going semi-regularly. Yeah.
But you've been to most countries in South America.
Yep.
A lot of countries in Europe. You've been in the Middle East.
Yep.
You've been in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. So Mary's had also quite a lot of experiences in different cultures.
And meeting Americans in those different places, living there or visiting there or volunteering sometimes with me.
And also you get to feel the reputation of Americans as well.
Yeah, and the prejudice, really. Because
America and tacky.
Well, I find it's quite strange. Some of the reputation is very rarely earned as much as because they meet one or two and then they go, well, that's everybody, but it's not like that at all.
Well, and it hurts to be prejudged. I feel a lot of times I'm very judged by people about, oh, here's another American, and I am actually very loud. I'm loud for an American, but here's another American. They're just going to be.
When you say you're loud, I think you just speak clearly and you speak your mind and
you speak
Thank
up.
You, Jesus.
Yeah,
and I reckon it's great.
It's like I was saying earlier. Someone who's loud and arrogant is quite domineering and bossy in the environment, but you're like vocal and you love truth, and so you're a pleasure to be around. And because you want to love, it also, as you grow more, you become warmer and more generous, and so this is a lovely thing about you.
Yeah.
Well, working on the love thing, but yeah, but it doesn't feel good to be prejudged about the country you come from.
No,
I can also sometimes I don't. That's another reason I like Australia. Is that Australia's I don't feel like they're not as harsh as when I feel around Europeans. I feel very unsophisticated.
Well, again, the European cultures, because they're been quite established for a long period of time, many of them do have this sort of degree of almost arrogance about
superiority.
Superiority about we're the established culture, like and you came from us, like you're a, it's like, it's the same. We've visited Greece and other places where they go, but we invented democracy, so there is a tendency in every culture to look down on other cultures, and a lot of that is because there's a tendency in every culture to be unloving to people they don't understand. So, and that's something obviously that causes a lot of problems around the world, and also in the end causes a lot of justification for violence in the world as well,
which can lead to wars.
Correct.
Easily.
Yeah.
Easily. Okay, so that was good to get some background on. Jesus has spent quite a bit of time in the U.S. Mary less, but she's got a lot of world traveling experience and has met a lot of Americans in her travels. And she's got some context because she's seen a lot of different cultures. So But what it even is culture is now maybe I shouldn't even use that word anymore.
Yeah.
But
well, it's a common word used, so we'll continue to use it, I suppose. But it's just something to bear in mind in the conversation.
It's good to define what we're talking about, is what I thought. It's good to be clear that it's not that, if your birth certificate says I was born in the United States, therefore I have A, B, and C.
Right.
But there's a history and there's a set of emotions and experiences that have usually shaped people who live there. So the descendants of those people often share similar injuries and qualities.
And qualities.
You know, not every culture is full of unlovingness.
Yeah, it's just all bad.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that. What are some, in your travels and just meeting Americans outside of the U.S., what are some common emotional qualities and injuries that you notice?
Well, let's start with what I'd classify as positive qualities.
Okay, let's do it.
I really enjoy Americans being outspoken.
Yeah.
I like that there's not a lot of hidden agenda, in the sense that, you know, sometimes there's hidden agenda emotionally, but that's a different issue. But when it comes to speaking their agenda, generally most Americans a lot of Americans, I should say, are pretty open about saying what their agenda is right up front. I enjoy the desire to know about spiritual matters, which is present in many Americans. That's something that's not really here in Australia. Like in Australia, as you know, having spent a bit of time here now, most people are not interested in any spiritual pursuit. Whereas in America, it's probably 70% of Americans are interested in a spiritual pursuit of some kind, even if it's not based on truth. At least they are interested in finding out about God and the universe and what's beyond the life they're living on Earth. And so there's also a focus on getting things done, and that's a very good thing.
Initiative. Initiative is something
yeah.
that I see as a positive quality, and amongst all the people from the States that
and it's only sort of the younger generation we see the initiative is almost being lost a bit, but the particularly the older generations, they show a lot of initiative and get things done, and are very proactive in getting things done. And that's a very good thing. This is often countries that began new or as a frontier, often have that sort of approach, because that is something that is engendered in the people who came before you, so it was encouraged. So there's a lot of positive things there, I feel. Just like there is in every culture around the earth, there's a lot of positive things. It's very rare to meet a culture where you go, in fact, it's impossible, I think, for any culture to have absolutely no redeeming qualities. So, yeah.
It's just, isn't it? It's where the qualities then become coloured by other injuries that we see the problem. So,
and maybe what we need to do is define what we mean by injuries.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so any time you have an emotion inside of you or a belief inside of you that's out of harmony with love, it causes within you things that are going to cause injury to yourself and to others. And so quite often Mary and I might refer to those as emotional injuries, which then trigger actual injury, physical injury, sexual injury, emotional injury, as well as spiritual injuries. Because, obviously if you believe the wrong things in terms of the things that are out of harmony with God's truth, then of course you're going to have spiritual injuries as well. So every culture has what I'd classify into those four primary areas. You got your physical injuries, which include your, you could say the medical injuries that a person may, physical things that may happen to you. You've got the sexual injuries that a person has or a group of people have, which causes you to, which changes your sexual behaviour. You've got the emotional injuries you have, which often defines how you treat people and what kind of treatment you dish out to others and also to yourself, And then there's also the spiritual injuries, which are all to do with your beliefs that are out of harmony with God's truth, which are all going to cause problems for a culture or for any pursuit a person has ever. Every time you have a belief that is false, you naturally will probably act upon that belief and therefore cause trouble to yourself or to others.
So can we say in a nutshell then that injuries are beliefs and values we have that are out of harmony love.
Well, I would say out of harmony with God's love and God's morality.
Yep.
So, in other words, out of harmony with God's established laws. Yep.
Yeah.
And these, and unfortunately on earth, humans are not very educated about what God's laws are either. And so what that means is that frequently we think we're doing something right or righteous, when actually from God's point of view, it's actually out of harmony with God's law or out of harmony with God's love.
In those 4 areas you just talked about them, there's a hierarchy, right? So if you have an emotional injury that's spiritual, that's going to cause a lot more problems than a physical injury.
Yeah, the spiritual injuries have the biggest detrimental effect on the planet. And the main reason why is because your beliefs determine what you then choose to do with your life and how you choose to act and how you choose to respond. And so your belief systems frequently, if they're out of harmony with love, what they will do is they will cause you to be an unloving individual one way or the other, and you feel like you want to be, which is the bigger issue, because it'd be different if you knew there was a problem and you didn't want to do it, right? But unfortunately, our emotional beliefs have firmly established in ourselves to the point where we believe them to be absolutely true. And by believing them to be absolutely true, we now act upon them as if they are true. And if they are out of harmony with love, that obviously is going to have very detrimental effects.
And is that an example of sin, with these things that we believe are absolutely true that are unloving?
Yeah, so what the Christian version of sin, which is a little different than what I view sin to be, but if you think about God's view of sin, what God's view of sin is, the word comes from the words that I used in the first century. The Hebrew words that I used in the first century were pertaining to missing the mark. So what I was referring to was missing the mark of God's love. So every time we miss the mark of God's love, we become a person who sins. We've aimed at a target, so let's say the target has a bullseye, the bullseye being the loving thing to do. And we've missed the target, we've missed that loving thing to do, and we've become unloving in our actions. So that's what I classified in the first century as sin. And every time we sin, we are acting out of harmony with God's truth and love, and therefore naturally there's going to be harmful consequences to both ourselves and to others. Now, every culture has different ways they sin. Absolutely every culture, because every culture has different beliefs. And many of those beliefs are out of harmony with love. And so that naturally means that because whatever way they're out of harmony with love is the way you end up sinning.
Cause and effect. So what are some of the beliefs that Americans have generally that are out of harmony with love, in your opinion?
Well, a really big one is this feeling of superiority. That's a terrible injury, actually. From God's perspective, all people who have ever lived and who will ever live are equal. So if you believe yourself to be superior as a nation, that naturally is going to cause a lot of injury to those people who you believe are inferior to you. And this, unfortunately, this injury has gotten established in different ways, because there's the religious superiority. So there's to do with religious belief, but then there's also things to do like with the economic superiority. So that's a money-related thing, which is more to do with your emotions about what you believe, what you're worth, as well. So now there's a mixture of superiority with religion and also superiority with my emotions in terms of I think I'm worth more. And when you mix those two things together, it creates a lot of potential damages to other people and other cultures that would, if you had a feeling of equality, that would not happen. Right.
So Americans with the superiority you're talking about, this can be a motivation to invade other countries. And militarily,
but also a motivation to try to visit the same beliefs upon other countries that they themselves have. There's also the general attitude of arrogance that Americans, because of this, have a reputation for in the world of, they don't see our culture as just as valuable as theirs. Mind you, that being said, I don't think any culture is valuable. So that's because it's based many times upon injury. Where it's valuable is where it's based upon truth and love.
Yeah.
But the average person starts to feel then that a person who feels superior often puts a lot of demands on others that they don't even realise they're putting on others. An example of that is, I want a certain type of food and I want a certain type of clothing, and when it's not there, I think, oh, well, everything here's useless now. Those kind of things. And so there's many ways in which that's, expressed, but fundamentally it comes from this underlying feeling that I'm worth more, and therefore I can demand more. And I'm superior, in terms of religiously, so therefore I can impose my beliefs upon others, that kind of thing. So
I think it also generates a feeling amongst individuals within that culture that discomfort is somehow a great harm against themselves rather than
Correct.
something to experience and learn from or heal from. So I think it creates a lot of personal unhappiness as well in individuals, because they have a feeling like this shouldn't be a part of my experience to find something particularly challenging or uncomfortable physically, emotionally,
I should be able to be comfortable all the time.
Yeah.
And because when things are on tap, like they are a lot in America, as you go to a shop and you've got, here in Australia you might have 5 varieties, but in America there's 50 varieties of the same thing and things like that. And you go expecting this after a while, and most people don't realise it, but by the time if you're born into a culture and you grow up with these expectations, now when you go to another one and they don't have the same things you have, you think, what's wrong with this culture? There's, we must be better because we've got more variety, that kind of thing. And these kind of attitudes develop quite easily without the person even understanding or knowing.
Because you're just swimming in the water, right?
Yes. You're marinating in the stew.
You could say
in your early years.
You could say you're growing in the environment would be a more polite way perhaps.
We like the metaphorical visuals.
That's right. And every time you have a certain environment and you're growing in it, that environment gets imposed upon you to a large degree. And so naturally you have attitudes that you think are normal, but actually you'll find if, you grew in a completely different environment, you wouldn't view them as normal.
And perhaps that's why you mentioned the arrogance or superiority first.
The inequality. It begins with the inequality.
Because, as you're saying, lots of people experience that where they grow up with a certain set of normal, if you like, that is often based on a mixture between injury and truth or whatever the home culture is. We grow up thinking that that's normal. But then when you go out and you experience a different culture or a different experience, if you have the sort of additional problem that you feel superior or that people aren't equal, then you have a tendency to impose that upon the new culture rather than to reflect upon your own and to seek what is the truthful, loving thing.
So,
and of course,
so instead of measuring it from God's standard, which when it comes to equality, that means that all of God's children are equal to each other. There's no one who's more superior to another. Then when you start seeing that everywhere, you start seeing, that means that if I treat a person as if they should do a job that I won't do, for example, which is a common feeling in America with different jobs, then it means that I've already got a superior attitude. So, for example, if I won't clean the toilet, but I expect someone else to do it for me, or I won't pick up the rubbish, but I expect someone else to do it for me, or I won't build the house, I expect someone else to. Construction industry is quite often the case, isn't it? Same goes when it comes to food production. A lot of that is done by other cultures in America. And, if I'm not willing to do it, but I expect somebody else to do it for me, then this means that I'm already treating my brothers and sisters as if they're not equal.
Seeing certain jobs as below you.
Yeah, eventually that's what you come to see. You come to sort of see things as, I'm above that. I'm better than that. And so there is this really strong, isn't there, image at times in Western cultures. This is very common, where a person who's so-called educated, in other words, they've got a university education, is viewed as having more worth than a person who has just a school education.
Isn't that coming from economic superiority again? Because traditionally, people who could get the secondary education were the wealthier people, and so then they got viewed as more valuable because they had that.
Yeah, you could say that's an effect, though. The cause is actually the fact that inside of me I'm not taught to have equality.
That's right.
So that's the cause, but the effect is I then start, say, valuing education, or I start valuing money or how much I earn as proof of my superiority. What I believe is proof of my superiority. What unfortunately, once I have I'm unable to see what it means to be equal to others, it taints so many areas of my life: sexually, emotionally, spiritually, physically, belief systems, economy, wealth versus poor. Even medicine and everything is tainted by it, because you look at people who believe they're worth more, they pay more for the medicine, and the people they feel they should, even though there's medicine available for some poor people, because they can't pay for it, they can't buy it. And you get all of these other problems in a culture because of the lack of feeling of equality.
Yeah.
So this is what I mean by it's such an important big injury, that one, the lack of feeling of equality, which is encouraged in America quite frequently. And you see it encouraged even in children, like, babies even encouraged, toddlers are being encouraged to have this feeling towards others.
Really? What are you talking about? What are people saying to babies?
Well, in some places in the States I've been to, particularly the southern states, the parents are discouraging their children at 2 years of age to have a relationship with an opposite coloured child, for example. There's an example of lack of equality. Why would you encourage such a thing? This is quite a common thing, to see these things. And the culture itself doesn't, because there's this so-called freedom of expression in America, there's no guidelines on the freedom of expression. So part of the guidelines should be, is what you're trying to do loving or not? Because if that's God's guideline, so anything out of harmony with that is sinful. So there's been many times in Southern America where I've driven past a service station, like a petrol station.
Gas station.
A gas station, you guys call it. And there's been a sign, no blacks here,
Shut up.
Or even worse, what it says is worse than that. I won't repeat it, but, just bad again, based on a fact of that equality is not encouraged. In a sense.
Yeah, and it must be being taught somewhere, because my experience in Venezuela as a 16-year-old with a bunch of other 16-year-olds, exchange students, and 3 or 4 of them were from the United States, and they were saying, oh, yeah, your country, fine, but America's the best.
The greatest country in the world.
And it's sort of, I've encountered that in many places actually, where people will just sort of say that to me without explanation or justification. It just is. And for me, a little country Australian girl with her cultural injuries at that time, it was sort of so alien to me to think that way about a nation, especially as a 16-year-old. You haven't really formed much of your self-aware opinions or identity at that point, but they were very strong. So it's obviously coming to people from a very young age. Yeah,
and there's many other examples, of course, you could give that you see and observe when you spend months of time at a time in a certain country. You see these very dominant emotional injuries which are out of harmony with love playing out in the culture, and hardly anybody in the culture believes it's a problem, because they've all been brought up to believe that their way of doing things is righteous.
What would you say to somebody who is in a class, maybe it's either a black woman or something, who are considered inferior within the American society? Are they still going to have these feelings of superiority for growing up in the American society?
Yeah, I met one black lady in America who, when I talked to her about the different injuries, it was a spiritual conversation we were having, and I talked to her about the different injuries in American culture. Mm-hmm. Even though she was a black lady who had been attacked many times in her own life for being black in America, she was defensive about the injuries I was pointing out. You know what I mean? I find that very fascinating that a person can be so embroiled in the culture that even though they themselves have been treated badly in the culture, they still feel superior to other cultures. Yeah. And
was she the lady drinking Diet Coke? Do you remember that story you told me?
Well, that was another lady. Oh, okay. Yeah, this was a lady who was a medium who ran a church, and she, she asked me, like, she found out I was from Australia after the church had finished, and so she asked me a few questions about what I thought about American culture. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I said, there's a lack of equality here, Mm-hmm. And she was talking about it's the most equal country on earth, and, how, and I can't agree, right. With those kind of statements. And the more I couldn't agree, the more the more angry she got with me about it. So, and yet her own life is a demonstration of the lack of equality she's experienced. So I found that quite interesting, that you can sort of imbibe a certain treatment even for yourself in the culture, and yet still feel that your culture is better than other cultures. So these kind of things are very interesting and often, again, well established in childhood.
This feeling of superiority, you guys are talking about it, and you're also talking about Americans really like their comforts and stuff. So it kind of brings us to a personal problem that I have as an American. It's the E word, entitlement.
Oh, yes,
yeah. And as you guys know, it's something I've struggled with, and I got a lot of resistance to, and I do have a lot of entitlement that I shouldn't have to go through hard things. Yeah.
And this often comes because in childhood we're taught, and you see this a lot in America, but also it's now a growing problem in Australia and in Europe as well, where you see children being taught they don't really have to do anything. Mum and dad will do it for them. Mum and dad will look after them. Mum and dad will care for them. They don't have to learn how to care for themselves. And so we often see, 16-year-old children in Western civilizations unable to even cook for themselves or clean up after themselves.
Or do their laundry.
Or do their own laundry, or plant a plant, or learn how to grow a tree. Many of them have not experienced it except at school. They've not experienced it at home, where they haven't been encouraged to do these things, to look after themselves and grow their own food, or and learn how to do things in their life. It's always about offloading things onto someone else. And this causes a lot of insecurity actually in children, in the sense that they start to feel a feeling that they are unable to actually look after themselves very well, and they become very dependent on society and other people and adults looking after them. And so when they become an adult themselves, they're now very dependent on other people being responsible for their comfort. So when other people go, well, I've got my life and you've got yours, you look after your comforts and I'll look after mine, type of thing, they almost view that as an offence.
A lack of love.
They view it as a lack of love, when actually it's a loving thing to learn how to look after yourself from a very young age. We've been encouraging parents here to ensure their children can look after themselves completely by the age of 5. And children are very capable of that. And these children who learn that also grow up to have a great deal of personal confidence that they can handle things. And it's the same goes with emotion too. That many Americans don't feel they can handle their feelings. They have their feelings, but quite often it's angry feelings. because they don't feel that they can handle feelings. They don't feel they can handle sadness or grief or shame or other feelings. And so whenever they feel you've made them feel a feeling, they get very upset because they can't have their feelings. They can't learn. They haven't learnt how to feel and appropriately manage their own feelings even.
And I think that's why you're seeing now in the States this polarisation politically, because it's very easy to manipulate a person who feels that they can't handle their if we call them their deeper or healing feelings, which is so grief and fear. So when you have a whole population that has grown up with the idea and the belief that I can't handle those feelings, my only option is anger, and then obviously different things happen and those deeper feelings get stirred up, a leader can come along and incite you to anger or tell you, no, if we just do it this way, no one will have to feel those feelings, and it becomes very attractive to people. And the reason
but I sort of see, I don't even think there's, from what Mary's saying, you may imply that she's talking about Trump specifically, but that's not the case.
I'm not.
She's actually.
I'm talking about polarisation on both ends.
There's a polarisation on both ends of political spectrum in the United States, which are caused where one side manipulates certain types of feelings to say you shouldn't have to feel these feelings, and another side says, there's these other feelings you shouldn't have to feel either, and it's like, who can make you feel the less feelings are the one who wins power.
And according to what your particular experience or life is about, makes one side more appealing than the other. But I think for some people it starts to get confusing because it's becoming, there's so many feelings that they want to suppress and it's becoming so polarised. But I think that that's how it happens, that people get more and more susceptible to manipulation, and that's not just America, that's everyone, everywhere. The more we believe, and we're taught as children that you can't handle difficult emotion, what we perceive as difficult emotion, the more susceptible to manipulation you are as you grow up, because your main driving force, based on the belief I can't handle it, is to avoid. And so anyone who promises even a short-term avoidance then becomes someone who you want to listen to and give energy to and give resources to. And this is what's driving a lot of concerning things on the planet. But
particularly, again, in Western countries.
Where there's so many resources, physical, emotional, and even sexual resources being put into the society to help them avoid, or being available to individuals in the society to help them avoid. Like, there's so many issues like pornography, even having mobile phones, like a lot of physical and sexual things that are actually causing people to feel less and less capable, and as Jesus called it, more and more insecure in their ability to cope with things. And this is how
and then because you're insecure, you want people to rescue you, and if it's not a person, like a family member to rescue, it's a government. You want the government to rescue you, and so you end up projecting at the government that it's required to do a lot of things for you because it should rescue you from you having to feel certain feelings. And a lot of people don't realise in Western cultures that they're actually creating demands upon government, that government have learnt to manipulate the feelings of people in order to meet the addictions of people. The more addictions of the persons, of the more people I can meet, the more probability there is of me getting into power. And so you end up with lots of other problems associated with that, where the person who, the political parties who can manipulate the people the most end up in power, and the political parties who don't have that underlying goal don't get a look in, because the underlying goal of the people is that I want somebody to make my bad feelings go away.
And I think that, for a certain number of Americans that we met on our last trip, not a huge amount, but a certain number, and then a lot of people, say, outside of the US, potentially looking at the US and saying, I can't believe what's happening there politically, or how is this even real, on both ends. But once you understand the fundamental driving force for why it's happening, which is actually these beliefs that Jesus started to talk about, which is, I feel like I can't cope with my feelings, you can, it's not so bizarre that things get so extreme.
Yeah, but again, it's something we see in Europe as well. It's
Europe,
exactly the
even
same
here
pattern,
in
even here in Australia, which is a very sort of laid back culture, as you know.
Well, we like to tell ourselves.
We like to tell ourselves
that's how our
but
values
it's becoming more and more the same, because the children of this generation are being taught the same.
Yeah.
They're being taught they can't handle their feelings, and they can't, somebody else is responsible for their life. And taught this from such a young age that they solidly believe it by the time they're 3. And by the time they're 5, they're so embroiled in it that for most families, a 5-year-old child has total control over the family.
Yeah.
For the same reason.
Yeah, and so when people look on at the US, because I see that as a growing kind of almost like prejudice against the US
America's
as
always catching strays. On online forums and stuff.
What does that mean?
Catching strays, like somebody will be talking about one thing, like shooting bullets, and then it'll be an opportunity to take a jab at America.
Right. Yes.
Gotcha.
Straight.
Yes. Yeah. But I see, as Jesus just expressed, that it's going to be a growing global issue. And it is. It already is. We're already seeing it everywhere.
Everywhere we go.
From a micro level to a macro level, like from individuals and families to governments.
Yeah. Right the way through.
Yeah.
So in some ways, because America has had a degree of comfort for a longer time, America is almost like a demonstration of where the whole world is headed if we all take on the same values. So this is a very interesting thing to contemplate, because the whole world is headed in the same direction as America if we take on the same values that America has taken on. And, you can see this very clearly. So one of the values that America has taken on sort of in the 60s and 50s was, we've got to stop our children from having to experience anything that's too traumatic or difficult for them. We want to look after them. We had a hard time. We want our children to have easy life instead. So we provide a lot of things for them. So there's this sort of thing that happened you saw a lot during the 50s and 60s, this thing that happened of, give your children as much as you can give them, and don't make them work for anything too much, let them have a lot of free time and let them do whatever they want while they're developing. Don't smack them anymore. And all of these kind of things. Some of them were a knee-jerk reaction to violence, but some of them were just a knee-jerk reaction to the pain and suffering that generation after the war was feeling. And so what they did was they provided their children absolutely everything, like laid on everything they could lay on depending on the funds they had.
Baby boomers, we're talking about the...
Yeah, and then, of course, the children then grew up with very strong entitlements, very strong feelings that they are even better than their own parents, and very strong feelings of inequality that they had as a result of those teachings. Now, that's what almost every Western culture is doing right now with their children. So it should cause people to go, oh, hang on a second, look at what's happening now in America, because it's quite obvious that things are becoming more polarised there. This is what's going to happen in our country if we continue with these values, right? But most people don't have... They're more interested in criticising another culture than they are in seeing it as a warning sign for their own culture. You follow me? And this is where I see sort of in some ways America has been ahead of the game with regard to doing certain things in families particularly, and with religion as well, sort of been ahead of the game in the sense, what I mean by that is they've been doing things before other cultures have started doing them. But as a result of that, you can also see where it's headed.
Where is it headed, Jesus?
Well, it's headed into darkness, unfortunately, and the whole world is unfortunately headed into darkness at the moment because we're following the same values, and fundamentally it starts in the family, with your children. What kind of values are you teaching your own children? And so, I see, that's a big problem. And in some ways I sort of think it's been good that America has done that, because it's an illustration to the other cultures that they shouldn't be doing that, and they can learn from it if they decided to, you know.
There's the opportunity to course correct, isn't there?
The opportunity.
And perhaps, you know, because our American brothers and sisters do have the initiative, they have less resistance to initiative, they've gone for it really hard.
That's right.
And so...
Yeah, that's right. And so that demonstrates, you know, this is what happens when you go for certain things. Like if you go for inequality to that amount of, you know, at all, and to the amount that America generally has, you can see, you know, it's funny because America thinks of itself as an equal, you know, equal opportunity type of nation, but the inequalities are so great, particularly between parents and children, particularly there.
The children think
the children are almost all children in almost every family we meet there think of themselves as superior to their parents. And then we also see it between men and women there a lot. The men frequently are making comments like, and they think they're innocent comments, but they're saying, yeah, I let my wife do that, or yeah, I told her she could do that. And I'm saying, what do you mean you told her she could do that? She doesn't have to be told she could do that. What are you thinking? You know, already there's a taint there of inequality between the husband and the wife, right? And so, and most of them are not conscious of it at all. And there's so many times when we go there and we meet, people email us and say things like, I can't come because my husband told me I couldn't. Yeah. And this is meant to be an equal, like, culture? No. Like, if your husband's telling you couldn't and you couldn't come because of it, then it means there's a problem with inequality in between the sexes, you know. And we see these things being played out in our audiences and when we meet people in their homes and everything. And yet when you say something about it, oftentimes the person who's been treated as lesser fights just as much for the position as the person who's been treating them as lesser does, you know, so the person who's superior. And that's interesting in itself. Like, that's an adherence to the nostalgia of a culture, rather than feeling the pain of of what's actually going on, you know.
Yeah.
And so we see this happening a lot as well. And again, it's something that's happening more and more in Western countries, other countries, including here in Australia.
Misogyny as well as spoiling children. Really?
Yeah.
Well, you say really, but you look at
how the boy children are treated versus how the girl children are treated.
They're treated like
the boy children are generally treated like they don't have to care for themselves. Mummy or a girl will do that for them at some point in their future. They don't have to cook for themselves, clean for themselves, look after themselves in the same way the girl is taught to do that. So there's the bed, if you like, the groundwork being laid straight away of treating the women worse than men, right, with our own children, and yet it's taken as a role rather than the justification is that that's their role, you know. So what we see is that now a lot of the boys we're meeting, which I can only call them boys, but they're 30 years old or 40 years old, a lot of them that we're meeting are still boys. They still act like 5-year-old boys who are going to get looked after by a woman and who have no desire to sort out their own life or take control of their own life or even care for another person. And if it wasn't for women caring for them, they probably wouldn't even have a family or anything, you know, wouldn't have children themselves without a woman already caring for them in some way. And so we see these things happening quite a lot, and it's something that, you know, in groups we meet, when we get the opportunity, we try to address it, you know, because we can see that's laying the groundwork for further bad treatment of women, right? That attitude. And that attitude is encouraged right from childhood. So we see little 2-year-old boys being encouraged in that attitude
by mothers and
fathers
and other women and men that they interact with, you know, within God's way. We see that even with participants. I've seen that a number of times where a young man, or again, you know, he might be 35, but he comes and joins a cleaning task with 8 other women, and the women are praising the man for participating, whereas the women are just doing the job.
And they're doing the majority of the work.
Yeah, look at how amazing it is. A man is cleaning.
Yeah.
Yeah. What?
Yeah.
It's not amazing. It's what he should be doing. And why are you giving him praise for it? Because all it's doing is feeding his addiction that he's going to have to get praise for it before he'll even do it. And it's just like, what are you doing, girls? To yourself in your future as well.
That's right.
And your life, you're continually teaching this man who's an adult male, supposedly, but he's a 5-year-old male who expects that women will clean up after him and that they'll praise him for doing what he should have done in the first place, which was clean up after himself. So, we see these things playing out a lot, and these kind of attitudes are, attitudes that have grown more and more in modern day culture towards children, because there's this feeling of, we don't want our children to have things as hard as what we had it when we were growing up,
Yeah, and I think essentially women still do a lot of the child rearing, and
course.
I think a lot of women they feel that they want to be liked by men, and even if that's their male child, and they feel driven to get the male child's approval more than to educate the male child.
Yeah. And they feel driven to get the male child's approval more than the female child's approval.
The female child is often far more independent at much earlier age, speaks sooner,
cares about other
for
people
themselves
more,
sooner,
Potty trained sooner.
We know one family where the male is 3 years old, still not potty trained. The daughters were all potty trained at 1.
Yeah.
So what happened? The male's getting fed this bad message, which is he's superior.
This problem with inequality amongst the sexes, do you think it's worse in America than other Western cultures?
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
There's inequality amongst the sexes in every single country on earth.
Okay.
And we haven't met a culture yet that doesn't have it, and have it to some quite extreme.
Is it ever reversed?
Historically?
No, I mean modern day. Is there any cultures that where women are seen as superior to men?
No, not really. A lot of cultures now sort of feel they're giving women freedom, but even the feeling that you're giving women freedom, that was something they already had.
It's not a gift to give.
Before.
Yeah, that's right. So,
and it's something that you're allowing, not
that's right. As if you're allowing
given.
it. Yeah. So if you look historically, we've had a very bad record of equality between the sexes. And the main reason why it began many, many tens of thousands of years ago, because fundamentally men believed themselves to be stronger physically, and so therefore could impose their feelings and emotions and rights and sexual demands on women. And unless men have a connection to equality inside their hearts, that's not going to change. And the reality is most men don't have a connection to equality inside their heart, because they continue to treat women in their culture and also in their families as if women should do the work that they shouldn't have to do.
That's beneath them in some way.
Yeah. If not even beneath them, it's like there's not a lot of honour in many men about the difficult job of child rearing, for example. Many families obviously send a man off to work because he often has been historically earning more funds, and they have the woman care for the children. And so the men then think, I'm the man earning the funds, so I'm the more important person in the family, and you're the one caring for the children, so you're the less important for the family. And many men still believe this. And so you end up with this sort of feeling that the whole process of child rearing is not very important either. Many men feel that. And this is why many men are not that keen on becoming fathers, because they fundamentally believe it's not a very important role, really. At the end of the day, that earning money is a more important role, or earning financial security is a more important role for the family. And the net result of that is that women and what they do, out of even convenience for the family, is not treated with equality.
Right, like raising the kids, taking
Yeah.
care of the home, that's seen as not very important.
Yes.
Even though it is important. If you didn't do that, then I'm sure that the males of the family would have a problem with that if they came home and the house was a mess.
Yeah, but the fact that he even thinks he would have a problem with that is a problem. Why would he have a problem? Just the thought of it is indicative of the lack of equality. So if I as a male have got a problem that my wife hasn't cared for the children properly, right? I've got a problem already. I've got a lack of equality already because I'm responsible for how I care for my children. And whether my wife is responsible or not, I'm still responsible. So at the end of the day, I've got to start my criticism with myself rather than my partner. So, most men don't think that way. You listen to their speech even, you can hear them say it all the time. It's like, oh, my wife, she cares for the children. The children, my wife, like I own her. The children, not really mine. Just the way we say things is often
interesting.
a expression of our injury.
Yeah. You're not like that, Jesus, and it's something that made me very uncomfortable. When I first met you and just relating to you, I always wanted to talk to Mary. I kind of want to stay away from you because you weren't acting the way that made me feel comfortable. I guess probably because you did treat me as an equal, and I just didn't really like to be around you.
Yeah, it's
the more
important.
I've gotten to know you, I'm like, I feel like maybe you're the first man who's ever loved me, actually, and ever treated me with respect. And it's really, I'm glad that I've kind of started to turn a corner on that, because it's just that how we feel what love is between a man and a woman is so far away from how God feels it, and you're way more you're the most in line with how God feels that. It just seems really foreign to people, I suppose.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you're brought up to be treated a certain way, you then sort of expect that treatment.
Yeah.
And then anything outside of that treatment, you're confused about. Like you generally are uncomfortable with.
And may I say, suspicious often.
And suspicious of,
what, he's not acting like the other guys, and I know how to kind of navigate this circumstance if there's some sexual element or some inequality or some barter. And if there's not that there, a lot of women become very disconcerted and often suspicious.
Yeah. It's like most women are used to a man sweet talking them rather than treating them as an equal. And I sort of see sweet talking a woman as, even Mary, sweet talking Mary, as condescension to Mary, really. If I need to sweet talk her, then it means that she's not feeling me, or I'm not properly expressing my true feelings for her.
And really you'd be saying to me, you can't handle it, dear, I'll soften it for you.
Yeah, that's right. Or I'm saying, I'm going to make out I'm sweet when really I want all these things from you, that kind of thing. So I don't, that none of that is loving, but a lot of women are very uncomfortable with that because they've been used. If somebody loves them, if a man so-called loves them, they think that's what he's going to do. So they get uncomfortable when you don't have those interactions.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, we're taught from a young age that if somebody meets our addictions, that it means they love us. So if I don't meet a person's addictions, then they often don't feel that I love them, even though I do. And so there's a lot of confusion that develops over time as to what it means to be loved by somebody. And the net result is each gender, both males and females, have different injuries in that regard. So many men sort of believe that if you tell them that they do it great all the time, even when they don't, that means they're being loved, right?
Oh, like a job or a task.
Yeah. So many men do terrible jobs, I've noticed, and that applies to many men who are highly educated as well as many men who are not. They just do terrible jobs because the women have picked up the slack in their life and done the tidy up after their job for the most part, and so most men don't even know how to clean up after themselves, to be honest. And so, when you tell them that, they feel like you're offending them. But a person who loves them should tell them that. So, and this is where it gets down to, like, if each person loves the other, you will be honest, you'll be straightforward, you'll be direct. you won't beat around the bush, but you're also not going to be unkind all the time and, critical and, desire to pull down the person and ridicule them. You won't do any of those things. You won't make fun of them, But if that's the way you've been sort of loved, I put that in quotation marks, as a child, that's the way you've been treated as a child. Frequently, that's what you expect, unfortunately.
And attract,
unfortunately, to help you deal with the problem so you can see that it is not love. But, a lot of women feel very uncomfortable when I interact with them. But so do a lot of men. Like there's just as many men uncomfortable with me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, as there are women, for the same reasons. Because they have certain expectations that they've been brought up with as children that they expect another man to respond to in a certain manner. Yeah. In fact, women generally are more comfortable with me than men are. So.
And that was the case in the first century as well?
Yeah. Mostly because women had a large degree of oppression that they had dealt with in their life from men. And when I tried to establish equality amongst my followers, the women, of course, felt like they were, for the first time, being treated lovingly when it was just equal.
Yeah.
And the men, for the first time, I felt like I wasn't being nice when I was just treating them equally. So quite frequently there were lots of criticisms of my treatment of Mary as well as my treatment of other women in the first century by the men who followed us. Yeah.
That was one of the first Divine Truth videos I connected to when I first listened, was when Jesus talked about in the first century how you brought Mary everywhere with you, even though a lot of the male followers or apostles you had problems with that, or
huge problems.
Yeah,
They frequently would follow behind us when we're travelling, complaining about me to the others.
But I even object to the terminology that you brought me with you. We went together.
I wanted Mary with me because I love her, and Mary wanted to be with me because she loved me, and we liked being together. And
so we went together.
And she's my equal, even though many of the men who were in our lives didn't treat us as such, and treated her badly many times, unfortunately. That is a common problem even now. So, there are many problems between the genders, and the reason why I sort of bring it up is that it's not an American problem.
Right, yeah.
It's a worldwide issue that's been around for millennia.
Well, and almost it's like you're bringing it up just to point out, hey, it is in the States as well for the American listeners. You're not exempt from this, because there is like a feeling a lot of times that's not our problem.
Yeah.
Look at all the language I'm using as an American. I obviously have it engendered in the way I speak, like this
Correct.
sexism.
Yeah. And we see this a lot in all around wherever we go, and in every country we go to, where, people's injuries are frequently just so open because they just talk about things in the manner they do that demonstrate that's how they feel, Yeah.
And you guys can just feel people too. You can understand what their injuries are when you...
Yeah, well, that helps, I suppose. But even if you can't feel people, it's pretty obvious from what they're saying there's a problem. Yeah.
Okay, another question for you, but I love your first century life. Oftentimes I refer to in the podcast as America as the new Roman Empire. And would you see any similarities from the Roman Empire in the first century in America now? Or is it, again, just a Western culture thing?
Well, certainly. America has grown into a world power. Its power now is on the slide. But in its heyday, shall we call it, the 20th century probably was its heyday, the 19th and 20th centuries, but particularly the 20th. It, in a lot of ways, had a lot of similar issues to what the Roman Empire had in its heyday when we lived on Earth. So many Western cultures have conquered other nations. They have used other nations' resources without consideration. They view other nations' resources as their own frequently. And so, these kind of problems have been there for centuries. And in fact, the Anglo-American world power, because it really began with Britain and then America, is really an outgrowth from the Roman world power in a lot of ways. If you study history, you can see how one sort of begot or gave birth to the other. And, during the 15th, 16th centuries, there was a bit of a battle as to who would become the world power, between a number of different nations in Europe.
France,
England.
Spain, Dutch.
All the colonialists.
Yeah. And all of them are responsible for atrocities committed to other nations. All of them, particularly during that time, but even still to this day. And so many of them do believe themselves to be just as superior as an American believes themselves to be. So I'm not singling out America as that. This is a worldwide problem. With different nations in the world believing that they have the right to conquer other nations and use their resources without consideration. And usually the bigger countries, and that includes Russia, China, and other countries as well, and particularly the five members of the permanent members of the Security Council of the United Nations. They all believe they have the right to war and the right to, overcome other countries and their resources without any view of equality. So a lack of equality is a huge problem on Earth. Yeah.
And I think in some ways, the Romans went and they conquered by rule, if you like, militarily, in a way that was more obvious than what has happened in the 20th century with the States, where it's not necessarily that they're governing other countries, but actually economically they govern.
They're controlling.
They control, and there's been a lot of nations impoverished in that time frame due to
the actions of Western nations or other nations who want this, have this lust for power.
And if America's power is on the wane, what world power do you think is increasing?
Well, obviously there's a competition, isn't there, at the moment? Unfortunately, it feels to me that many nations are almost like, bullies in a schoolyard competing for power over the other bullies, sort of thing, and then competing for power over all the people who are afraid of them. And unfortunately, the bigger the populace of a nation, generally, the more power it can generally wield. There were times in history where that wasn't strictly true, but for the most part, that is quite true. And we see that happening as well. So at the moment, it's a lot of nations don't realise that it's very hard to gain power because of the way the world's economy and everything is now structured. Everything is so linked together. And so really a lot of who really has the power now are not countries so much as businesses, companies. Okay. Many companies wield huge amounts of power. And so a lot of power nowadays is not necessarily political. Historically, during the Dark Ages, it was religious. Now it's more economic.
Gotcha.
And so the true power brokers of Earth now are not so much the nations of Earth so much as it is the companies that drive those nations to do what they do. And unfortunately, that's a growing trend which will probably continue given the fact that everyone's quite addicted to gaining wealth.
And I think that's interesting for the US as well, because the big part of the common idea of what it means to be American is to be capitalist and to be in commerce and business. And so a lot of that's why I feel the US has sort of become like this power broker, because it is economic, the control of nations now. And there's so much emphasis of it in the States.
Yeah, but that also being said, though, you got nations now like China, for example, who have almost before they had not a lot of focus on capitalism, particularly during the 50s and 60s, but now there's huge focus on capitalism in China, and so now China sort of realizes that it can gain a lot of control over the world by exercising economic power. And the same goes with a lot of other countries historically and now. They all feel the same. So they're all competing for more economic power than they are for political power.
Yeah.
And so the dynamics of Earth are changing quite a lot. But unfortunately, they're becoming more ruthless as well, because now companies can drive governments to war. Rather than it just being interest of the country to go to war, as it was perhaps. And I'm using these terms very loosely. I don't think it's in anybody's interest to go to war ever. And in fact, if you were loving, you would never even think of the idea. But unfortunately now, a lot of companies are at war with each other, competing for power, and a lot of governments are almost the pawns of these companies now in a lot of ways. So, and in reality, a lot of the people who are the voters, or you could say the average person, is also a pawn in this very larger game that's going on, which is driven by the lack of equality. So, the problem with equality is a big problem. And in a lot of ways, a lot of people in the West a lot of people in the West believe that they live in an equal nation, but actually you see it playing out even between the sexes all the time. And you see it playing out between different racial people with racial backgrounds, as well as playing out particularly with wealth. So you see a lot of inequality with wealth now, where the people who feel themselves to be rich feel themselves to be worth more, and the people they believe are poor are worth less. And so, you end up with all of these unfortunate inequalities, which are causing lots of trouble for the earth now. Of course, they always have. It's just that there's more of us now.
Yeah.
And so the problems are going to be bigger.
So, talking of problems, world problems, you're talking about going into darkness, that America's going in darkness and kind of leading.
The world is.
Yeah, the world is. So what does that look like? What does that look like in 5 to 10 years from now?
Well, the beautiful thing about God's laws is every time we embrace an unloving attitude of some kind and act upon it and then live by it, there will be the reflection in our environment as to the damage it's causing. And that's called the law of cause and effect. So when there is a cause and then there's the effect. The effect is that when things get more violent, the world is heading towards more violence, and the world is heading towards more inequality, unfortunately, and particularly economic inequality. And, the more we head toward these things, the darker everything's going to become, in the sense that it's going to become more unloving. Now, the good thing about that is that hopefully at some point the world will realise, we've become more unloving. And then hopefully they can correct their behaviour by learning about love and learning how to be more loving. That's the result of the law of cause and effect. You see the effects and hopefully you can see the cause and address the cause. So that's what I see happening. I'm not too worried or concerned about it in the way that most people would be, because I understand that many people on earth at the moment are very blind they're in denial about the unloving effects they're living in already. And for that reason, things can only get worse before they get better. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Helena was asking about what it looks like, and I was thinking about specific examples. There's the potential for war, more war. There's already war, so much war.
Yeah.
But also, I think, I always think about it from like a macro and micro level. Like on an individual level, darkness is when we are disconnected from our soul. And so
disconnected from love.
Disconnected from love, from God, but even from natural love.
From kindness. Compassion. And more people are becoming like that.
Being able to see and feel another, and yourself and another.
Yeah.
People are becoming more and more disconnected from themselves and others. And so
in the younger generation, there's this illusion that they're more loving, but actually what we see is them treating each other more, often worse than the prior generation.
Well, and if people don't agree that they're more loving, then there's a propensity for sort of violence towards the person who doesn't agree with their image of themselves.
I know you're talking about like the Gen Z type protesters. Yeah. Mary's nodding her head. Yeah. Who are saying they care about equality, but it's like, we care about equality.
Yeah, they're angry about it.
We care about the environment, so we're going to go into an art museum and pour paint on a painting.
Which is actually a violent act. Mm-hmm. So why would you, if you cared for things, why would you commit violent acts? Obviously, there's a lot of quite dark emotions that would drive a violent act. It's sort of like, let's protest against Israel now, so let's not buy any produce from Israel, for example, that kind of thing. The younger generation feel that's more loving, but how is it more loving? You're now committing another violent act in response to their violent act. So, a more loving thing to do would be loving to them, and hopefully through love embrace them in such a way that they then decide love is a better way to go, And I'm not saying Israel is more violent than the Arab nations are here either. It's quite obvious that every nation on earth has a lot of problems with this, with regard to these problems. And every single nation believes they're righteous doing the response or giving the response they have. And the reality is often not righteous from God's perspective, often not loving from God's perspective. So, the act of protest even, which is thought to be loving, the better thing to do is to act lovingly than protest about it being unloving.
Yeah.
Is protesting kind of like just complaining?
Well, in a lot of ways, it's saying I'm not responsible for it being unloving. Let's make somebody else responsible for it. All of us are responsible for making the world a more loving place, and you're not going to make it more loving by protesting. You're going to make it more loving by acting upon love, by acting in a loving manner. That's how you're going to make it more loving. In fact, in a lot of ways, protesting is a waste of time because all you do is you go down a protest, go for a march down down the local city or whatever, protesting about something, and what actually finishes up changing? Nobody's willing to put the effort into making the change. And firstly, change begins as an individual. It begins with me. Very few people are putting any effort into changing themselves so that their own attitudes are more loving. And then I would act upon the more loving attitude inside of myself and act more lovingly to others. And probably once I do that, I won't feel inclined to protest because I'm already acting more lovingly to others. And already there's a response coming from others in that they respond to love. People are designed by God to respond to love. So naturally that's going to happen if we become more loving. Yeah.
Yeah, can I pick up on something that you're talking about there? Apologies for hijacking your podcast, Helena. But I think it's interesting. I almost want to interview you two now. But, in my 20s, I suppose, my late teens and 20s, I used to look at nations like the US and even Australia and see a lot of this focus on the individual self, gaining wealth, what I saw to be quite selfish practices in individuals. And those of you all know me, so sometimes I joke about being a socialist. I'm not really a socialist, but I had these kind of leanings that, like if everyone just looked out for each other more, we'd all be, and shared everything equally, we'd all be better. And now, of course, I see what Jesus was just referring to, the individual responsibility. And I sometimes feel like in the US there is a strong emphasis culturally on the individual, like the individuals is paramount in terms of we should look at our own happiness, our own wealth, our own getting ahead. But actually
But that's not really what I was saying, was it? I'm looking at more the individual friend in terms of where am I unloving?
This is what I'm getting to. Like if that was flipped, rather than the individual sort of happiness at any cost to anyone else. If it was flipped and it was like, oh no, individually I must make these changes, it almost becomes a superpower in a loving sense, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
There's already the focus
But unfortunately, it's very hard for a person who's been self-absorbed and selfish to actually start looking at themselves sincerely and making some change. In fact, it is harder for a person who's been self-absorbed and selfish to make changes than it is for a person who already isn't self-absorbed and selfish.
Yeah, so it's going to require people who've been more oppressed to take more personal responsibility.
I don't know if it's just that. I think it just requires some level of self-reflection on the part of people who are self-absorbed and selfish. It requires you to start going, wow, I can see that I am only really concerned about myself. I'm only really concerned about my life. I'm only really concerned about my wealth. I'm only really concerned about what's good for me. And to see that as a fault rather than seeing it as a good thing.
Yeah.
If I have the feeling of equality in me, I'll be just as concerned about your welfare as I will be about my own. Now, that doesn't mean I'll be less concerned about my own. It's that I'm equally concerned about yours to the same extent. So that means that if I see you in an unfortunate circumstances, I won't say, oh, I have some funds, but that's mine. I'm not going to give it to you. What I will feel like is that, no, these are not my funds. They are funds that I've been gifted. Now I can use those funds in a loving manner, right? And here I can see you need to be loved more. So you need some of those funds. Does that make sense? So I want to give you some of those funds. So, and that applies to some of my effort, my time, my energy as well, of course, because money is it's one of the lesser resources that we have compared to other resources that each of us have as an individual. So if I have a feeling that I need to look at myself and see where I'm being, I'm treating people with inequity, then I would be a lot more circumspect about, okay, do I really need the thing I think I need? And what about the fact of giving it to you as much as it giving to me? And also the question is, what happens if all of us get that thing? So, for example, in America, everyone wants a car, usually more than one, many times.
A big one.
And a big one, generally. But if everyone on Earth, 8 billion people had a car, the Earth would be absolutely ruined by that. It's already going towards ruin already. Imagine the ruin of that. So if I was looking at that myself, I'm going, can I share a car with somebody? Can we share a car with 4 people? Do we have to all have one car each? This would help me if I had some level of self-reflection. It helps me go, where am I not being loving here? And if I do the thing I want to do and everybody else did the same thing as what I want to do, where would we be, right? And so this can cause a lot of pause in a person's action, and they can go, oh, okay, if everybody on Earth wanted a V8 car that, and that wasn't shared and it was just owned by individuals or whatever, and everybody on Earth wanted an electric vehicle, if everybody on Earth was given one, where would we be? And we if you look at the resources these things use, you can see that the Earth would be in a really bad place with its resources. So if that's the case, then we can go, well, okay, it doesn't look like it's very righteous of me and not very loving of me to expect that I have my own vehicle and Mary has her own vehicle and our children have their own vehicle and, all of our friends have their own vehicle. What would be more loving is that we come up with some way of cooperating where we can share vehicles. That would be a more loving approach. And if I considered that, then I can go, what causes me inside of me to feel like I need that thing, the thing that I'm hoping to get? And this can help me see where I'm not being equal, where I have an attitude of inequality with other people in other countries, where I'm basically saying I'm happy for them to not have one. They can use a bicycle, right? But I need a vehicle. And you can see whole societies are designed around the vehicle now. In America, that's very noticeable, isn't it? There's hardly any, in some cities, there's hardly any public transportation at all. You hardly see anybody riding a bike because it's way too dangerous to run.
Even just having a pavement to walk on.
Yeah,
Because we often walk places. It's very hard to find a walking path often.
Yeah, in the USA,
in the city,
in particular,
obviously.
even in the country USA, we found it often difficult. You know, we have to walk on the road, you know, like you're dodging cars while you're going for a walk. You know, the whole culture is designed around the vehicle, you know, in that regard. And imagine if every culture on Earth was like that, how damaging would that be to the environment, to the resources of the Earth? How much more fuel would we need than we're using now? And if we're not using, you know, this whole argument about electric vehicles is all, you know, obviously flawed because there's huge amounts of resources used to make the current batteries that are being made and how the toxicity that it's causing different places on the planet and so forth. So there's all sorts of problems associated with the fact that I feel superior to you, and so I should be able to have 2 cars. I should be able to have 2 houses. I should be able to have a bigger house than you. This is something in America, isn't it, where the big house is like the goal, you know, like, and we often go to America and we look at people's average house, that some people that, you know, well, I suppose you'd classify them as middle class Americans, but they have like a couple of houses, but they're humongous things, you know, like compared to what we would have in Australia. We've got like, you know, about, I think it's 100, it's about 1,200 square feet or something, and it's big enough for us, you know. In America, it's like 3,600 square feet, 4,800 square feet. These are things that are touted as the American dream, you know. But if everybody on Earth dreamed the American dream, where would everyone on Earth, resource-wise, end up? It's an important question to ask.
And this is where I was kind of trying to formulate a question before. It's like I feel like socialism was born out of seeing that problem of the resources in some ways.
Yeah, to a degree.
To a degree, but nobody dealt with their feelings. And so therefore it became another unloving regime that really put a lot of people in lack, and still there was people who were living kind of in
ostentatiously,
in a, you know, in a superior way to those people, So really, what I'm interested in, it seems to me that the people, the West, if you like, or these people who have these entitled feelings, they have to change these feelings and then their actions will change.
Correct.
And
their beliefs really need to begin with.
Yes, because otherwise
you're not going to change your feelings unless you change your beliefs first. So if I have the belief that I have the right to get whatever I want whenever I want it, let's say I have that belief, that's going to drive many of my feelings. Like when I don't get what I want and when I do get what I want, my happiness is there. When I do get what I want, my happiness, I'm unhappy when I don't get what I want. So a lot of my feelings are going to be driven by that belief.
Yeah.
So unless I change the belief first, so the belief becomes more loving, then of course my feelings will be confronted. Then I can change my feelings by just feeling them and working through them and recognising the unlovingness of my feelings. Then my behaviour will change. Then the outcome will be different. But unless that happens, there's not going to be any real change. Can I just pause? Because I got to go to the toilet.
Yeah, and I need to...
All right, we just had a brief pause and we're back.
Yep, needed a pit stop.
Yeah, pit stop. So we were kind of talking about how to turn the ship around, how to make things better in America, but in all nations that are heading into darkness as the world is heading into darkness. But before we do that, can we please talk about facade? Because I think facade is one of the problems that America has in particular, or in abundance. And can you describe what that is and what you've noticed about it with Americans?
Well, again, it's a growing problem in the whole world, really, isn't it? Where people are becoming addicted to presenting a false self to others because of the seeming rewards that it brings. And of course, those rewards are not long term; they are just short term. So you could say that a facade, which is really the false presentation, the fake presentation of yourself to yourself, firstly, and then to others, you could say that those things are really a goal that most people are now aspiring towards. But it seems to be very common in America when we go there.
Yeah.
It is a very common thing that most Americans are doing, presenting a facade, particularly about their feelings about things, because quite often they have very, very strong feelings about things, but they're not willing to say what those feelings are. And they also have very strong private beliefs about things that they're frequently not willing to talk about as well.
There seems to be a high value placed on being pleasant, polite. I hesitate saying pleasant because it doesn't feel very pleasant when a person is not being real, but it's this idea of what is good social etiquette is often a lot of niceties that when you feel a person are not often backed up by their actual feelings.
Yeah. So you see it playing out again in all of the areas of spiritual life. In other words, their belief systems, the emotions, the sexual behaviour, and the physical behaviour. So an example of physical behaviour is like becoming addicted to procedures to look better. So
West Coast thing in particular.
Like, so what is it? Botox, and I don't know much about these things, so forgive me.
Plastic surgery,
or
cosmetic surgery, being addicted to the gym, to try to get to look good, taking steroids in order to look good, taking medicinal things to slim, rather than just changing your diet. These kind of things that are far, often there's an attraction to the fastest way to achieve the goal rather than the best way to achieve it. So that's physically.
Yeah, can I also, because when you said procedures to make yourself look better, I didn't quite click initially. I was thinking more like actual procedures for doing things, even like buying an electric vehicle to appear more environmentally conscious is a physical thing.
When the reality is the average person who's bought one's probably never planted a plant their entire life.
Yes. Yeah. Or, changing a set of actions rather than so that things appear to be more equitable even, and they're not in reality the same. The woman still has to get the teas for the meeting, even though she's said to be an equal member of the team or something.
And also,
the coffees.
The woman in home still does most of the housework, for example.
Even if she works full time.
Even if she works full time, and that's a well-known fact, right? Yeah. So these are this is men and women virtue signaling that they are better than they really are, which is creating a facade. And the facade is a lie. It's a straight out lie from God's perspective. You're presenting a lie, firstly to yourself and then to others. Now, any time you present a lie and you live a lie, you are going to have a negative consequence from it. So whether that lie is physically changing my body and presenting a lie, then obviously I'm adding substances to my body. Sooner or later I'm going to pay the penalty for that. Sooner or later my body is going to start rejecting those substances. There's going to be things that go wrong with me putting these substances into my body. I'll start looking quite strange as a result of that. And these are the consequences of making such decisions.
And also there's emotional and spiritual consequences.
Well, I haven't got there yet.
They're the facades, but even in the physical, I know for myself, like even the desire to cover over aging is so that I avoid actually a feeling. So I can take a physical action, but there's a feeling that I have less worth as a woman if I'm not.
So fundamentally you're saying I can't cope with that feeling, so I need this physical thing to overcome the feeling. So this is why there's an addiction to coffee in Western Hemisphere in particular, because coffee helps you overcome certain feelings, but it's detrimental to your body. It's detrimental. If it's detrimental to the unborn child, it's also detrimental to your body. But the average person doesn't think of it that way. You know, it's also detrimental to the environment, and the average person doesn't look at it like that either. So that's a physical example.
Yeah, and it's detrimental in the long term to me because each
Correct.
time I ingest or partake or inject or whatever I'm doing, I'm reinforcing to myself that I can't handle that feeling.
Correct. So you're actually weakening your own ability to cope with your own life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, you want to move on to the
Well, then there's the sexual side of faking things, you know. So you see this a lot where, you know, people fake their orgasm, for example. But also just faking things like faking sexual attraction to get something. So an example of that is flirting, which is really a faking of a sexual attraction in order to get something else.
Yeah.
You know, these things are out of harmony with love and they cause all sorts of trouble too. In relationships, they cause all sorts of trouble, but they also cause all sorts of trouble to the individual. Then you've got the faking of the emotion, which is a big thing in America, you know, where the average person acts like they're not angry, but they're extremely angry.
Yeah.
You know, I've met so many Americans who are extremely angry and yet they come across all polite and I'm going, but you're so angry, man.
That was the biggest criticism people had of me in America, I think, generally, was that how angry I was. Especially when I was in New Age circles and I was like, I can't meditate, I'm just really angry all the time. And people would be like, this is a problem, you need to fix it. You're resisting it. Even people listening to Divine Truth.
But the way they fix it is by going fake on it.
Going numb.
And that's not fixing it.
No.
You know, to fix anger, you got to deal with sadness and grief and you got to deal with shame and other emotions that cause your anger. But the average person in America believes, you fix it by going all fake.
Or smoking a lot of weed.
Yeah, by denying your anger, by calming yourself down, by making your life more comfortable. That's how you deal with
by
it.
reframing it inside, like sort of brainwashing yourself out of the reality.
Anger.
You know, there's like that toxic positivity idea of, you know, or it's really all good and really they're in a better place now and really like all these things that people say to get away from how they actually feel.
Which when you're there, you feel that they don't feel at all. At all. And yet there's a fakeness to it all as well, just to portray it. And a lot of Americans we meet have got into the habit so much that it's almost they now sort of believe that their fake is real.
Mm-hmm. They believe their own facade.
Yeah, but they actually think they're being real when like at the beginning they knew they were being fake, but they've done it for so long that they now think they're real, you know, and still being fake. And so it's really hard to help people with that in America because it's against the truth principle, you know, it's against God's truth to do these things. And so it's something that we often discuss with people, and you see it happening all the time there, and it's interesting when you just get to the edge of it. The average person gets so angry that we never see them again.
When the facade is so challenged.
The facade is so challenged that we never see them again, and which is a shame because if they just persisted, they'd get beyond it and start to get real about things, you know, and get real about how sad they are and get real about how unhappy they are and how their life really is and how their relationship really is and so forth. There's a lot of not wanting to know that, you know, not wanting to, because they can't cope with the feeling because you've been taught to be comfortable. You're not able to cope with any of those feelings. So
well, and this is the situation I'm in, you know, that I've been trying to work on, you know, that I've had less of a facade, I guess, than most Americans, so I've just been really angry.
Which is like when we met you, we said, well, that's good. At least you're not like constantly telling us you're not angry when you really are. Yeah, and when I first discovered Divine Truth, I know people have these honeymoon periods where they really love it, and I was just like, God, this sucks because Jesus and Mary are telling me I have to take away everything that's given me pleasure. And I already feel like a weirdo, and now people are going to think I'm even a bigger weirdo because I'm listening to people who say they're Jesus and Mary, and just so many things are challenged. I just didn't like it at all. And also, we haven't taken away everything that brings you pleasure.
Let's reassess that.
Let's just fix that.
Yeah, so you're right. It's true. You're taking. I was realized I was going to get rid of
and we've never taken anything away from you.
That's true.
You've decided to take away things from you that bring you addictive pleasure.
And you know why you've done
Which is very different than taking away your pleasure. But unfortunately, if most of your life was an addiction, then it feels like everything's getting taken away, doesn't it?
That's and this is where your love of truth has actually served you, even though you feel
it's pulled me through.
Yeah,
it's pulled me through. And having to come to terms with, like, it's not something I've really gotten into, but I realize I'm pretty miserable, and I've led a pretty lonely, miserable life. You know? And it's like, and now I'm having my first. I've had 6 months of happiness, and I just can't believe how fucking happy I am. And I'm still going through a troubled time, but
the fact that you swore about it probably indicates it.
It's so fucking happy. But yeah, it's bringing up the thoughts about, like, what's the rest of my life been like.
That's right. There's sadness there that you're still not wanting to feel, right?
Correct.
And then there's the facade with belief, which we see a lot too, where people say they believe in love, for example, but it's a very corrupted version of love, you know, that they're believing. It's mostly addiction, which is a very corrupt version of love. It's not even a version of love. And then they say things like, you know, I do believe that, you know, even Christians, I do believe in hell, but they act like they don't. You know.
What do you mean? How do they act?
Well, a person who believes in hell would surely feel very circumspect about choosing to do unloving things in their life. But a person frequently in America who believes in hell still chooses to do unloving things in their life, even knowing, supposedly, that those things may lead to them being in hell. Do you know what I mean?
They're hoping for a deathbed conversion or
there's also that. There's the fakeness about confession, like confessing your sins. You see this very common in America, in American Christian religions faiths, where people openly say what they sin like, but the next week they do the same sins. And so you go, well, that's not very sincere. You know, that's fake. That's a facade. If you're just saying to people what your sins are without actually correcting them, then you don't really believe they're a sin, obviously, because otherwise you would want to correct them, right? And then, you know, so there's many what I would classify as belief systems, such as about, like, what is loving in a family, for example. So many husbands are going, I really love my wife, you know, I really love her, you know, but then he says, I let her do this straight after that. I let her go to that thing. Remember that, love? I let you go there. What does he mean he let her? The whole attitude that he let her means that he didn't love her. Like, if he loved her, he'd want her to do whatever she wants, and he would realise he has no control over it whatsoever. Like, you know, so there's so many areas where a person fakes things in different areas of their life, and you know, I suppose you could say in a lot of ways America has become addicted to the fake in a lot of ways.
Sort of in love with it, ensconced with it,
Yes.
feeling you know, feeling that it's really the thing to aspire to. Is
if
more
I don't
fakeness.
like something about myself, I can just change it by faking it. And in fact, that's where the saying, it seems to us anyway, that's where the saying come from. You know, fake it until you make it. That's a very common saying in America, isn't it?
True.
Yeah,
And it's a saying we hear from many Americans when we're travelling. And we're saying, no, don't fake it until you make it. Like, realise that you can't fake it at all.
You're never going to make it if you fake it.
Never going to make it if you fake it, is what I would say instead.
I like that,
Unfortunately, many people believe the opposite to that. So, the facade issue, which is really about, again, a lot of to do with comfort, isn't it? Anything that I create a facade about is because I want to feel more comfortable about it. So, you know, I'm not comfortable with my looks, so I want to create a fake look. You know, I'm not comfortable with my sexual feelings, you know, so I got to create fake sexual feelings instead. I'm not comfortable with my emotions, so I've got to create fake emotions instead. You know, and I haven't sorted out my beliefs, so I create fake beliefs where I make out I have those beliefs instead. And so you see this a lot. Like, isn't it true in some states in America it's still homosexuality is outlawed, I understand. Is that true?
I don't know. Well, I mean, I don't know if it's...
Because I know...
No, because didn't gay marriage that passed, did that pass federally or by state?
I don't
I think
know.
it's by state.
Okay.
I think it's by state.
I think it's by state.
Was my understanding.
it's not
And it
federal.
wasn't in every state still,
Yeah.
as was my understanding. I may be wrong, but even the whole idea that I can legislate somebody's sexual behaviour is so fake to believe you can do such a thing. How would you do such a thing? You know, you'd have to be in their bedroom with them, wouldn't you, in order to manage their sexual behaviour. It's such, you know, such things that just I find outstanding that there was even a law, you know, about those things. And America's not the only country, again, that does those things, right? But it seems to me that the more fake you create, the less connection with truth you have. And so this is something also that I notice when I'm visiting America a lot, is that, and it's the same growing problem in Europe as well, and we find the same problem here in Australia and most Western countries again. But there's this sort of growing attitude that there is no such thing as truth. There's no such thing as God's truth, factual truth. Everybody has their own opinion. It's my truth and your truth and his truth and her truth. And my truth is this and your truth is that. And all of these concepts come about because we want to fake life and we don't want there to be an absolute truth. But what God knows is absolute truth. So I see the whole desire for a facade as a very strong indication societally that we don't want the truth. We don't want the truth about our environment, our country, our family, our own person. For the most part, it starts there, where we don't even want to know what feelings I have ourselves and be honest and truthful about them. And of course, then it just explodes into the next. So if I'm being fake with myself and Mary's being fake with herself, if we're in a relationship, we're now in a fake relationship. If we have children, we now have children that are brought up in a fake family, right? And then we have a fake family contributing with other fake families, creating a fake society. And a fake society creates a fake political and environmental life for us when we're in the country. A fake culture it creates is what it does. And these things are all anti-truth or anti-God, anti-truth. And yet the American faith, Christian faith, says they want truth. And yet it is so against truth in that regard. So this is where I see a huge sort of like a presentation or denial of the lie. You know, it's denial that things aren't right, happy. And I think you know, and most Americans know, that life in America isn't necessarily happier than anywhere else.
No, because I am also lucky, like Mary, that I've been able to experience and travel a lot, other cultures and travel a lot. And yeah, I wouldn't say that.
No.
Especially post 9/11. Yeah, I feel
fear has a huge effect on people's fake. You know, the more afraid people become, the more they fake their feelings and the more they fake their life. And because they don't even want to own up to the fact that they're afraid. And also, why do we want governments to rescue us from our fear? We could just choose to feel our fear, but the average person who wants comfort doesn't want to feel their fear. And so that is also another emotion that most people in the Western world are very uncomfortable feeling, their fear. So you end up with this facade. So facade is a nice way of saying lie. Or a nice way of saying completely fake, isn't it, really? So Mary and I have used the term facade in the past, but I'd probably prefer to say, well, you can lie to yourself by faking yourself, and you can lie to others by faking yourself to others, but you're not able to do it with God.
You have become more forward over the years, haven't you, Jesus?
Well, I don't know if I've become more forward. I think less tolerant of people's...
BS?
Yeah, of people lying to themselves, I think. You know, what I see a lot happening is, you know, there's this sort of idea in most people that their feelings are more important than anything else. And that's not true. your beliefs are more important than anything else. And in particular, beliefs that are true are more important than anything, including me. They're more important than they're by which my life will be led, and they're also God's truth determines my entire life. Like the laws govern my entire life. So it feels to me when people are in denial of that truth, they're in denial of a fundamental principle that governs happiness. And so what I see is people creating a lot of their own unhappiness by creating facades that they then live by, not understanding that by living by them you become convinced of your facade, and also unfortunately you're predetermined to become unhappy at some point in your future.
Well, it indicates you're already unhappy, aren't you? That's
Correct.
why you're creating the facade.
Correct.
But at some point you won't be able to maintain it any longer, and then you won't be able to live in the delusion anymore that the facade is working.
Yes.
Because I feel like for me, working through facade, that was the biggest issue I had, was seeing how invested I was in maintaining the tendency was to say, I have to be like this so other people like me.
Yeah.
But actually a lot of it was, I need to be like this so I can live with myself, so I like myself enough.
So I can handle myself in the mirror, Yeah, so you're right, it is a big problem in the USA, and because people are sort of, it's funny how the Christian belief system, the false Christian belief system, which is present on earth, has sort of contributed to it in the USA, because there's sort of this feeling that I'm not allowed to be angry. Being angry is a sin. I'm not allowed to own up that I'm angry. I'm not allowed to own up to my problems. But I've got to do everything. If I do own up, I do it in all the fake way, as if I really care, but I don't really care either. These kind of things are encouraged in a way by that faith, because there's no real answers of how to deal with all that in the faith. And no faith on earth, aside from God's truth, no faith on earth really understands how to deal with your problems and how to deal with your sin and how to release yourself from your sin. They either believe that I came to die for their sin, or they believe that there's going to be some magical wiping out of their sin when they pass, or if they believe in an afterlife at all. And for those people who don't believe in an afterlife, they don't believe there's anything such as sin anyway. So generally they don't even believe there is such a concept as sin. And so therefore they're not worried about any of that either. And so, it just seems to me that many of these things, to our own detriment, are believed in. But long-term unhappiness is going to be the result. And I see... over the years, I started going to America in 2005, I think it was. And so now it's 20 years that I've visited America. Not every year, but a lot of the years we've visited America in that time, I have. And every year it just seems people are becoming more unhappy there. And it's just a general feeling, the growing unhappiness, there's a general ramping up of the dissatisfaction in the society, and a general ramping up generally of rage as well in the society that you see, and amongst the people we've met as well. There's a general increasing of those things too. And that is indicative that, obviously what is portrayed as the loving thing to do is not what love really is, because if it was love that was being brought to the States, the States would be becoming happier.
Everyone would be happier
rather than more unhappy.
One phrase that always used to just infuriate me that I would hear a lot in the States was, everybody's doing their best.
Yeah.
And I would say, if that's true,
we are
in problem.
The world would not be in such a shitty position.
That's right.
And I was like, I'm not even doing my best today. Like, I know for a fact right now I'm not doing my best.
And I think if most people are honest with themselves, they'd have to say that.
Yeah. And actually, I find that that's quite insulting to the people who are doing their best.
Yeah.
There's a few out there who are really giving it a shot.
Yeah. That being said, it's interesting too in America that if there were a number of people who really loved the truth to the point where they were willing to, didn't worry, they didn't care emotionally what it meant to them emotionally to love it. And they loved God's love, they received enough of God's love to understand its power. Things would be really also quite confronting in the US after that, because there'd be a huge demonstration of the differences between what America believes is love versus what is actually love. So I see there's a lot of potential there as well in that regard. The other thing that I also see is that the countries of Earth, and many of the large countries, like I said, the 5 Security Council members, many of those countries are bullies. They are bullies as countries, they bully other countries. And the problem with a bully is that generally the bully has to change before everybody's happy. So the power, America doesn't understand the power it has if it stopped being a bully.
Yeah.
So I'm talking about turning the ship around. Like if America, as a metaphor, is like a big yacht or something, and it's going towards an iceberg.
Let's call it an oil-powered cruise liner.
It's bigger than a yacht.
Oil-powered cruise liner. It could, if we went the other way, it could do a lot of good.
This one was intimating before,
The strong will of Americans could be used for good.
Correct. And it's also it would demonstrate to the other countries who are also searching for power and who are also bullies, because there's many of them, it would demonstrate that you can not be a bully and be a safer country, a safer country to live in, and a safer country to interact with other countries. So, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of potential scope in America for there to be quite significant change, that they can possibly lead. But at this stage, they're more leading towards the bully way rather than sort of going, well, hang on a sec, no, let's give up this whole bullying process that we had. It's not really working. And I think there's a lot of people in America that are afraid that if they're not a bully, they'll get bullied.
Yeah.
There seems to be a lot of people who, and this is a constant thing bullies feel, that most bullies are more afraid than anybody else, right? So if you look at a little school and there's a bully in the school, usually he's got more fear than the rest of the people, and he just uses his rage to try to overcome his fear, right? And psychologically, if you can address the bully's sadness and fear, then he won't bully anymore, right? And the same really applies to, every country that is a bully. So a lot of countries would have a tendency towards being a bully, but they're just not big enough. So it's not a thing just to America. Like most countries on Earth, if they were as large as, had a large population like America does and had the resources and scope that America does, many of them would turn into bullies anyway. And so, it's not something that's specifically relating to the American culture, but if America decided they were going to love rather than be a bully, then things would change quite significantly in their dealings and interactions with other countries. And who knows, they may demonstrate through that everyone in the country can become happier. And imagine, as an idea that then could be presented to other countries,
Yeah.
So are you saying that one of the ways that America could change for the better is that if there were a group of individuals who were American who decided to make a change and lead by example?
Yeah.
What you're saying?
Yeah. One of the things we find difficult when we go to America is that everyone is so steeped in their addictions that it's very hard for them to contemplate giving them up. And yet if they don't give them up, then there's going to be no one leading a change in America. That's the reality, And a lot of Americans are very afraid about being different, being different to everyone else.
We didn't get to touch on that. That's something I wanted to raise.
It is a big thing there, like where they're so afraid about being different. It's funny the contrast we see between America and Canada sometimes, because in Canada, like being quirky and different is almost encouraged, and then in America it's like very discouraged. Like everyone's got to be very similar to each other. It's like all the cool dudes wear black. It's like that kind of thing. There's no colour. Most men in America don't wear much colour unless they're claim to be, unless everyone thinks they're gay. It doesn't mean they are, but it just often what's said. And just the whole attitude of everyone being the same or pertaining to the same behaviour. There's so much scope for love in everybody being different.
Yeah.
Right. Not having different beliefs about love, because that's impossible. You can't have a country where everybody has different beliefs about love and hope that it's going to be calm and peaceful.
That's what we have, and it's not working.
Yeah, everyone has different beliefs about love, and that does need to change. But if it would only take a few people or a small group of people to make some fundamental changes before people became very attracted to that, because there is a lot of unhappiness in the States too. And we see that unhappiness. That's why there's a lot of anger, because there is a lot of unhappiness that people don't feel they can cope with feeling. And if people could see how to be happy, nobody really knows how to be. There's not much teaching about how to become happy, and there's nobody demonstrating it. That we meet in America. There's very few people we see in America who are demonstrating that where they're willing to confront their addictions all day, every day, and willing to just be kind and considerate to everyone else all day and every day. And
to be different without, just be at peace with being their own individual self. Even though we talk about...
But also loving God's truth, like loving God's truth, receiving God's love, loving God's truth. So it's not just a natural love thing where they can do it. They don't need God's help to do it.
That's right. But in doing it... Yeah. In terms of like being able to love God's principles enough that they're okay with being different from others without having to make a big point about it or freak out about it. Just like being yourself in harmony with God's principles. Yeah. That's all. Like, that in itself would be a massive demonstration for a lot of people. And
also just the growing happiness. Would be because there are a lot of people in the States who are covering over their unhappiness a lot, with addiction, covering over their unhappiness. And I don't just mean physical addictions like drugs and alcohol and things like that. I mean, or looking better or all those things, but actual emotional addictions and sexual addictions as well.
Like having codependent relationships, things like that.
Yeah, just covering over a lot of unhappiness there. And if there were some people willing to change all that, and really sincerely willing to change all that, then those people they'd stick out like sore thumbs, as the saying here in Australia is, and people would be asking why, how did you make that change? So that's one of the reasons why we visited America. Is we're hoping that's a potential that we're hoping will come about,
Well, I still really care about America, and I do feel very worried about where it's going, and I worry about my brothers and sisters back home. And,
when you're brought up in a culture, naturally you have some kind of affinity, don't you, and nostalgia regarding them, and so naturally you might have a bit of connection to them in that regard. I think as you grow in love, though, you feel more like an earthling than an American.
Right. Like you were talking about earlier, the idea of cultures is that as we grow in love, that'll all disappear.
Yeah, well, but there's still an affinity to the fact that you were growing up there.
I know how it is.
Yeah, you know how it is. It's like a Russian's going to feel the same way about Russia, and a Chinese is going to feel the same about China. It's the same feeling that every person has because they brought up in that culture. They understand it better than the other cultures. They sort of understand where they come from. When I say understand it better, I think they understand the addiction of it better, but I don't know if they really understand it better.
Well, this is the thing. As you work through the things, you will come to understand it more, and potentially the reason why you feel worried for people in America is because you're facing certain things that they're all going to have to face, and you're finding it a bit of a challenge at times.
Yep.
And they're going to find it a challenge too, and that's true. But if they could do it, there's also, the happiness you've been experiencing the last few months. There's also that, isn't there?
Yeah, and I do really identify with what you're saying about not wanting to stick out, like I mentioned earlier about feeling like a weirdo or a freak. I think that's caused me a lot of unhappiness. Not being myself, and the more I've been myself, the happier I've been too. And by being yourself more, I've noticed I've opened up to people more and let people open up to me too, and that's because directly from feedback from you guys, to tell me.
Well, it's really from God, isn't it? In the sense that God's truth is wonderful like that. It frees you to realise that He created you to be you and not a fake you. He created you to work out what your true personality and nature is and be it. Because He wants you to be it. Because if you're not it, you're not your true nature or personality, then naturally you have to be faking it.
So
He wants you to be real.
I was going to ask how God fits into this healing process. I mean, we just be seeking God's opinion about things more, shouldn't we?
Well, there's two things, isn't there? There's feeling God's love for you is a big thing, because once you feel loved, it automatically makes you less addicted to things that you think give you the perception of love but don't, and so it causes you to also have a sense of, God wants me to be a certain way, because I can feel God loves me more when I'm just myself. You know what I mean? And so once you also feel love, you gain a level of confidence about yourself, such as you're confident you can handle things. You're confident you can feel your emotions and handle it. You're confident that you can have experiences that you can handle. You're confident about expressing yourself in the world more because you're loved by somebody, and that person is encouraging you to do such things. So there's firstly the love. That's a very important part of this, We've been teaching about receiving divine love in America, like I said, for 20 years. And very few people I've met there, even if they have received it, they've not acted in harmony with it. They mostly act in harmony with their addiction still, and that means that you can't receive more. And the more you receive, the better, the more loving you become. The less you want your addictions. The more kind and compassionate you'll want to be, and in a real sense, not in a fake sense, So there's that. And then there's the second thing you mentioned, which is truth, like wanting the truth and wanting to live by it at any cost, even to the cost of your comfort and your emotions and your addictions, right? In America, it sometimes feels to us like addictions are like paramount, like meeting an addiction is like, that's my joy.
Well, can we tell the story about the Diet Coke now? 'Cause I kind of didn't want to, I didn't know if you wanted to tell it, but Jesus told me this story when I first met him about a public talk that he was giving in the US, and there was a lady sitting in the front row, and she had one of those jumbo, I don't know what you guys call them again, but like the jumbo size Diet Coke things with the straw in the top.
And she was drinking it.
She was drinking it during the talk, and somehow it came up that you said, well, if you're going to have a relationship with God, like a lasting relationship with God, you're going to give up Diet Coke. And she was like, well, that's it then. No, I can't do without...
She literally said that.
She
said, I don't want a relationship with God if it means giving up Diet Coke.
That just seems like such a small thing to give up for everlasting happiness.
And it's funny, people criticise me for saying these things, but actually it is true. Once you have a relationship with God, you will not feel like you need a Diet Coke. You just won't. Right. And the reason why is because you'll feel how much toxicity is in it. There's chemicals in it, there's, sweeteners in it, it's not good for your health, as anybody who's drunk a lot of it,
Yes.
would
A lot
know,
of people get very sick.
And I'm not saying Diet Coke either, Coke as well, all these soft fizzy drinks, as they're called. I don't know why they call them soft drinks, because they end up to be quite hard on your body.
Because they're not hard liquor, I suppose.
That's right. Yeah. So, but you don't feel the need to have these things when you have a relationship with God, because the very thing you're using it for is to avoid some feelings. And once you're prepared to feel those feelings, you don't feel you want sweet things anymore. You just don't, And that's coming from a person like me who used to eat a bucket load of ice cream at one sitting, and I used to buy a slab, which is 24 Coke at a time. So, I've had the experience of knowing about these matters. And what amazes me is that people are willing to give up their relationship with God for a physical thing like that.
Yeah, and that's why I brought it up, because it's exactly the point you were making, that really we have to, in that relationship with God, you naturally want to give up your addictions. But if you come to the very first point and you're like, well, I'm not going to do it. If it means no Diet Coke, that's it. It's off the table.
Yeah, I never saw her again. She came to one event in Florida, it was, and never saw her again. Just because of that comment.
Yeah.
And I go, well, isn't that strange? It's like, that tells me a number of things. Firstly, the person does not understand the beautiful things about having a relationship with God, firstly. Secondly, they don't understand the very damaging things about drinking Diet Coke every day. The physical and emotional effects that it's having on their body every day. Because it does have an emotional effect as well as a physical one. It affects brain chemicals and all sorts of things that cause you to have the illusion of pleasure when you don't really have it, and things like that. So, there's a whole heap of things that are affected by it, and yet the person doesn't understand any of that either. So there's a lack of education there in terms of the benefits of a relationship with God, but also the detrimental effects of the physical thing that they are addicted to.
Yeah, and even like we're giggling because none of us drink Coke, and it sort of feels like,
but I've drank a lot of Coke Zero in my life, so I can't judge this woman either.
Yeah, me too. Me too. In the past, mixed with rum, so it wasn't soft anymore. So I've had a lot of addictions, but there's still things, if we're honest, that we feel like I don't want to give that up if if it means, and for us now maybe it's a lot more emotional things that we're up against. But this is
but
what's
many
required.
people don't want to give up their physical addictions, their emotional addictions, or their sexual addictions, or their beliefs.
Which is a spiritual addiction.
Which are spiritual addictions for the sake of having a relationship with God and having a relationship with God's truth.
Preach it, babe.
Preach.
So it is a big problem that the States has, but again, it's another growing problem in the rest of the world.
Well, I think we outlined what I wanted to talk about. I introduced you guys, a little bit of background about you being the Messiah, and then your experience in America and some of the biggest issues that face Americans. So, facade. We started off with superiority.
Well, inequality. Inequality, really. It's a big
inequality, which leads to entitlement.
Yep.
Which is a big problem in America.
Yeah, it leads to superiority. Yep.
And how that plays out and how that looks and how America's going down a dark path, and a lot of Western countries are as well.
And are following them,
because it's sort of aspiring. The
and not
US
only Western
example.
countries, there's many countries now on earth that are aspiring to be like America.
Well, goodness, when I travelled in the late 90s and early 2000s, I went to many what you would have called developing nations, and all of them were aspiring towards American.
Drinking Coke
and
watching Hollywood movies.
And the diet, everything, entertainment, lifestyle, business.
And then we talked about how to turn the ship around, which seems like it's kind of an individual process.
You can't turn a country around without individuals in the country turning around. It's impossible to change a country. A country is just a collection of individuals, and God deals with individuals, not with countries. So the reality is individuals need to change, and that applies to every country on earth. So while you are interested in America, obviously, because you come from there, from my perspective, I'm interested in every country, and every child is a child of God, and every country there needs to be people in every country whose heart change and turn around and have a relationship with God and a relationship with truth. And so it's the same thing that's going to solve the problems of every country, not just America in itself. But as we said, because America has been in the past a leader of countries, you can imagine if it did change, it could potentially lead change. Yeah. As to whether that's likely or not is a different matter, because it depends on how steeped you are in your emotional addictions and physical addictions and sexual addictions and spiritual addictions as to how willing you become to change those things. Oh,
I almost forgot the good things you said about America at the very beginning. We're outspoken.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Yes.
I love that. It's
a quality I have.
Not shy.
Not generally shy.
There are some.
There are some Americans we meet that are shy, obviously, but generally more outspoken than the average person. And so when people are upset with us in an American audience, generally they voice it, and we like that. We like that.
Like it.
Then you can have the necessary conversation.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Well, I disagree with you a lot, and we hash it out, don't we?
Yeah, that's right, we do. And this is a good thing, because you, in expressing your true opinion, obviously that helps with any conversation, because then you can address the true opinion, the true feelings of a person, rather than their fake ones. That's why I'm worried a bit about America becoming more fake, because then we're not expressing the true feelings anymore.
Just expressing displeasure, but not the true displeasure or the true
feelings,
disagreement.
Yeah.
And this is why it's a pleasure dealing with you and being friends with you, Helena, because you have this lovely love of truth and desire to love others. And you have this, I'm going to engage, and I'm not going to.
You have your disagreements, but you're not shy about expressing them. But that then leads to conversation, which then can also lead to absorbing more truth.
Yeah.
Right. So I love that. Yeah, that's great. Then there's also, like I said, the desire to do things, get things done.
Yes. Go-getters. Entrepreneurship is very exalted in America, which I loved as
really
a
good.
Small business owner.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's really good. It encourages people to be a bit more self-responsible in that regard. It also it's really good in the sense that when it comes to at least, obviously it's not in every aspect of life in America, but it is in business life in America a lot, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Where there's this get it done, let's achieve this type of thing.
Show me the money.
That kind of thing. I suppose some of it is driven by the money, but some of it is also driven by just, this is a good thing we want to do, let's get it done type of thing.
Yeah.
And willing to take, many people we meet in America are willing to take action, unfortunately in harmony with their addictions many times, but if they were willing to take action in harmony with love and truth, then things could change quite substantially there.
Yeah.
And then there's, the lovely things about just what it was founded on, the principles it was founded on. Because a lot of the founding father principles are actually good principles. Not all of them, obviously. Obviously viewing a black man is worth 1/3 or 1/4 of a white man is not a good principle.
And leaving the women out of the vote.
And leaving the women out of the vote completely, not a good principle. But there are many other principles that it was founded on that are good principles if they are understood and practiced.
Yeah.
And free speech.
Yes, but again, like the whole principle of free speech, even if it's violent, is not a good principle.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense? So yes, a person should be allowed to have free speech, but once you start getting violent, what I mean by that is when you start encouraging violence towards others, and you start belittling and not free speech for the sake of discussion, very good. Free speech for the sake of pulling a person down, very bad.
Gotcha.
Right. So there's not a true understanding of God's understanding of what God would like to see when it comes to free speech.
Yeah.
But the principle which was there is a good principle.
Were any of the founding fathers, did they have a connection with God?
Many of them, yes.
Oh, for real?
Many of them
when they were founding or after they passed?
sometimes even when they were many of them.
Really? Like who?
Yeah, well, historically, many of your presidents have had some connection with God because they've been brought up Christian. Many of them are now celestial spirits. Abraham Lincoln comes to mind. He's a celestial spirit. George Washington's a celestial spirit. So there's celestial spirits who were American presidents. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they would love to see America make some changes.
Really, you think they care about that?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Because they're partly responsible for where it is now. So of course they would like to see those changes.
Yeah.
So yes, we know many Americans who were involved in the founding of the American nation, who are now celestial spirits. So naturally, they have a strong desire for America to make changes.
I have respect for the founding fathers. It must have been pretty scary to break away from England and.
Yeah, and there was a lot of pressure from England, to the point where there was a war, obviously, the War of Independence. But a lot of pressure from England, a lot of financial pressure too.
And
was brought to bear.
also, I respect
economic pressure.
Oh, sorry, sweetheart. I respect that they tried. They kind of gave it a shot at making a document that would have some integrity, have some aspiration. You have some,
which
loving
was the beginnings
principle.
of your constitution, right?
Yeah, it wasn't
because it's not. There's been so many addendums and amendments now.
Oh yeah.
But
you mean like the Bill of Rights and
all the different bills that have been introduced are all sort of like adjustments, you could say. But the very first documents created, they had the right intention.
You mean the Declaration of Independence?
More the following documents relating to how humans should be treated.
Yeah.
So the Declaration of Independence was really driven to declare their independence from Britain more than anything else. But
it was a bit of an up yours to Britain.
Yeah, it's a bit of that. But
we're sick of it, Britain.
Yeah, but the underlying principles pertaining to peace and goodwill amongst men
and the sort of the inherent value of people.
Yeah, the worth of people, and these are all loving principles.
And the feeling I have from just because we were talking about them, I felt them come around, but the feeling I have from them is sort of like, hey, like we gave it a shot, but we had some injuries, guys.
That's right.
It would have been so good if you just amended to get those injuries out rather than sort of heading down a track more in harmony with the injuries.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
So yes, if you think about the fundamental principles that the nation itself was founded on. I know I'm talking now about the white nation, I suppose, because obviously, there were many Americans before white people settled in America, English people in particular who settled in America.
Yeah.
But it became an organised structure to try to provide peace, to the people there. Now, of course, there were a lot of bad things done.
Well, towards slaves and towards the people who were already living there. It was terrible atrocities.
Of course, terrible atrocities committed there. And naturally, any country that had a loving goals would try to amend those atrocities, right? But that being said, there are good things in the words. I'm not necessarily saying good things in the actions, but good things in the words that if everybody acted and lived in harmony with, things would change quite a lot.
Yeah.
That's a very inspiring note probably to end on.
And Helena, one day I'd love to come and interview you for your podcast.
That would be awesome, Mary. Let's do it. Yeah. All right.
And one day we'll have to go to America with you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That would be
And you can podcast on the road.
Yes. Trying to keep it trying to keep it real. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's great what you're doing because you by keeping it by being as truthful as you are, and you're very honest with us as well, and it's great. You're also being honest about, okay, I can see how hard these things are to deal with,
Hard,
and you can also see for your compatriots in America, obviously, going to be hard to deal with some of these things. Because they've been indoctrinated now for years, generations.
Yeah, I was just born into it. My parents who taught me that said we're just born into it, and it goes on and on and on. So it's like, I guess the way to feel compassion for the situation we're in.
Yeah.
And we feel the same about every culture, because every culture generally has hundreds, if not thousands, of years of history, which has brought about its culture, and so every person in that culture has often similar injuries because of the culture culturally being taught to have them.
Yeah.
And so we feel the same when we visit other countries. When this last trip we were in like Austria, Belgium, Portugal, England, Ireland, Canada, USA, and we felt the same level of compassion for each country because of the different types of injuries they've imbibed. The difference is some of those countries haven't had the opportunity to become bullies.
Right.
And some of those countries also haven't had the opportunity to dominate the world stage.
Yeah.
So a lot of people can judge America, but
yeah,
it's really not right, because maybe if they were in the same position,
Correct.
they would have done the same thing.
It's like that principle, when your will is enabled, what are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
And that's on an individual as well as a collective level. And some people and some countries haven't had their will enabled as much as others, and so they're, as Jesus said, just as likely to have done as much damage,
if not more.
Yeah.
Depending on the different injuries.
Yeah.
And you guys are set to return to the world stage.
Well,
I don't know if it's a stage.
it's not a stage, but and it's not really a world stage. It's like 4 countries we're visiting.
But so you're visiting 4 countries. Can you tell me a little bit about your plans for the future?
Yeah, we're just so we leave in 3 weeks to do a trip, and we'll be visiting this time the UK, Portugal, Canada, and the USA. The main reason why only 4 this time is because last time we found it quite tiring trying to fit 9 in the same period of time.
Yeah.
So that's why we've sort of backed it off a bit this year. But it also gives us a bit more time to spend with people in those countries this time.
So we're away for 4 months and 4 countries. So the idea is that we have more time in each country.
So almost a month in each country. And so then we get the chance to sort of spend a bit more time with people, which we were hoping to do, which last time we really were in a rush from country to country last time. It was quite difficult. But we also hopefully will have some good discussions with people about, particularly about God and love and truth and principles, like what God's principles are. And, particularly regarding beliefs as well, other things we want to talk about, and we'll see how it goes. I think at this stage, we've still got many open spots, haven't we, in most countries?
Yeah. If anyone would like to join us, we'll be in Cirencester.
The events are free.
They're free, and there's plenty of free seats.
Yeah.
You can find all the listings on event.divinetruth.com.
Yeah.
But in England, we'll be in Cirencester, and that's the last weekend in May. And then in June, we'll be in Villarreal in Portugal. July, we'll be in Wolfville, Nova Scotia, and
Canada.
Then we head to Canada. So we're in North
Canada.
Carolina.
Then we head to America.
Sorry. Then we.
Wolfville, Nova Scotia is Canada.
Podcast is about.
That's right. That's the last place we're going to. North Carolina. At the end. So that's in. August.
What city are you in, North Carolina?
We're near Raleigh. Chapel Hill it is. Yeah.
Chapel Hill.
Raleigh, Charlotte is nearby, relatively.
They're nearby, but it's Chapel Hill is where we'll be.
So if people wanted to know more about Divine Truth, where would they find you guys on the internet?
The website, divinetruth.com.
Okay.
we also have 4 YouTube channels.
Okay.
3 that have got data on them.
Got quite a lot of content on them.
Yeah.
So
Hundreds of hours.
yeah, thousands probably of hours.
Yeah.
So there is.
But it's a bit frustrating sometimes on YouTube, but there's the Divine Truth channels on YouTube.
Yep. So Divine Truth Main, Divine Truth FAQ, and Divine Truth Clips.
Or something like that.
Clips.
But also we have 2 servers which are situated in the States. They're called US Pub, so USPUBOO and USPUB01. And they are basically, they're not a pretty, it's just a file structure where you can drill into, particularly if you go into DT, there's a folder there called DT, and under there's videos and audios, and you can download anything you want, and it's all for free.
So how could someone access this?
They just type in on their web browser, uspub.divinetruth.com.
.divinetruth.com. That's very important at the end.
Yeah.
And then you're going to get the files, as Jesus is saying, and you can just download them, because on YouTube there's ads now. We haven't opted into ads, but because of the amount of content we have, YouTube has opted us in. So this option is a way to download individual files of talks, whether they're audios or videos, without ads.
Okay, great. I will put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
And it's all for free, so, and the events are free as well. So nobody has to pay any money or anything like that. We do receive gifts and donations from people in order to keep doing what we do. But there's no pressure on people in order, if they come, that they give us a donation or anything like that.
You're very generous. Yeah.
And also at every event this year, we're going to be giving away the Padgett Messages.
Yes, we talked about him at the beginning of the episode.
So there's 4 volumes of those that we want to give to most of the participants. So I think
we've got to say while stocks last.
So we've bought a certain amount based on how many people are registered right now. So. And we can't really get more in time for the events now, but we're hoping to do this every year, is to give away some messages every year for people who haven't got them before. So, and that'll be for free too. People will get them as a gift. So we've organised that. Mary's organised that, I should say. Along with 3 or 4 other people in country, because it's been quite a, there's half a ton of books in each country.
Yes, they've all been, helping to share that gift, checking all the shipments and checking we've got the right amount of books and everything. So,
So that's really good, and we'll be able to share those when we're doing the trip as well. So that's what we're doing this year. And of course, we're still doing projects in God's Way, the organisation that we are founding members of. So there's projects that will be happening when we're back home that we've designed, but people will be hopefully following through on
while we're away.
Yeah. So. But we're involved in quite a lot, and it's been quite busy. We're also hoping to do videos this time we travel.
Last year you just did audio.
We just did audio last year, but this year's a lot more involved because we're doing videos, and it's quite quite hard to get it all in the baggage limits that we have for our trip. So it's been we're still doing it actually. We hope to be done by next week or the week after.
But then we leave the following week.
But we still haven't got all of our equipment yet, even though that we've all been in this process for 5 months. But it's getting there, and so we hope to be able to do videos while we're away too. It doesn't mean the videos will be up after we leave, because somebody has to edit them, and we won't have time to edit them. So
people are welcome to make their own bootleg
copies,
recordings at the events, and share them however they want to.
And also bring the mobile phones and record them that way as well if they want. So we don't restrict people with their tech at our events.
You don't really restrict people with
anything, really.
Well, with loving principles, I hope we restrict people.
Well, no, we don't.
There's a lack of love.
We don't tell them what to do though in their lives.
No, not at all. But at the event, we do take love seriously.
Loving principles.
Yes. I always try to tell people that when they, because a lot of people think I'm in a cult, and I'm like, it's not a cult. Jesus and Mary don't tell you what to do. They want you to live your own life.
Yes.
And people say that's what people in a cult say. That's not a cult. So you really can't win.
But for like 20 years we've been doing this. So we might say it, but we also do it.
You walk the walk.
Yeah.
Just thank you so much.
No
Not
worries.
just for coming to the podcast.
Yeah,
but
it's a
just
joy.
in general. Yeah, you
Yeah.
guys. Thank you so much for all your love. Yeah, I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, it's our pleasure.
We love knowing you, Helena.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, well, I'm gonna wrap it up now.
Yep. See you later, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.